Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with the Virtual Tasting Society. Wow, today that was a mouthful. Today we're excited to welcome a brand that's very exciting and one that I've been looking forward to tasting. We have some insider people at this brand. Hi, Anna. There you go. We're excited to welcome the distillery manager, Tyler Pederson.
Yeah, you got
Perfect. All right. Tyler has taken over the reins of Westland Distillery now that Mr. Hoffman has left. But I do believe they hired an Adam Hoofman, and Anna can tell us more about that later. All that said, we're super excited for today's tasting. Not only are we tasting 7 amazing expressions from Westland Distillery, we also have a barley experience for everyone to try. So everyone who's here, who's trying this live, has some ground up barley. You know what? I'm gonna not butcher it and let Anna and Tyler tell us about what we're tasting, what we're doing, everything we can expect, and just hand it over to you guys.
Thanks, Vadim.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I'm gonna get my screen shared here and we can fire away. Yeah, again, thank you, Vadim, for hosting this gathering. Thank you all for taking the time out of your Friday night to join us here. It's really kind of a pleasure to be doing this. Certainly not something that I get an opportunity to do often, is get in front of people and share the work that we've been doing. So I appreciate this more than you'll probably ever know. Diving right into it, we're going to go through and talk about Westland history, the American single malt whiskey category as a whole, and what's going on with the TTB. I'm going to talk a lot about raw materials, production of Westland whiskey. We're going to drink some Flagship. That's the first glass that you've got. We'll go through all of the production process that we've got here, but really focusing kind of on what differentiates us from others that you are probably very, very familiar with. And then we'll finish with the OPR or Outpost range, which has our Colere, Garryana, Solum whiskeys, and then talk a little bit Cask Exchange, which I don't have any samples here for you, but I thought it would be worth sharing. And then we'll finish off with some single cask whiskey. So the brand history, and please at any point raise a hand and stop me in my tracks if you want a question answered or need clarification on anything.
Or yeah, just ask in the chat, guys. I'll be monitoring, so I can always. Okay.
Exactly. Brand history.
First, before we do that, can Anna, Tyler, can you both introduce yourselves so we know who we're listening to?
No. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
I was gonna say I'll mute you, Anna, but you're already on mute, so there's not much you can do at this point.
So yeah, Tyler Pederson, I've been with the company now 10 years. Kind of started out on the production side, mashing and distillation, worn many hats, barreling, bottling, all of that. Working on supply chain management and process optimization, and kind of looking around corners and trying to figure out how to make whiskey for the future. Before I got into this business in particular, I did a little bit of sales and marketing experience for a whiskey company out of Indiana, bringing them into the Washington and Oregon state markets. I was bartender for a number of years, working at a kind of high-end, high-volume restaurant, and then grew up in restaurants as well. So food and beverage is always going to be somewhere in my orbit. And yeah, very fortunate that the Westland team took me in.
Most of you know me, Anna Hins. I am the business development manager here at Westland. I've been here for just a year, but I have been a Westland fan for many, many years. I've been here visiting as a patron since 2015, so very familiar with their work even prior to me being here. What I work on is project management, working with kind of all of our teams, and also process optimization in a different facet, and then also working with independent bottlers and our export markets. So it's a really fun aspect of what we do, sharing our whiskey out.
Yeah, very important parts. So yeah, this whole crazy scheme got started back in 2010 by two high school friends, and they had a love for whiskey, and they had kind of this entrepreneurial drive. So they set out looking and surveying the land to see what kind of whiskey they were going to make. And it turns out that Washington State, we can grow corn, but we don't really grow it as well as they do elsewhere. And we don't really grow a lot of rye because it's considered a noxious weed in many states, or many counties, I should say. A brief whiskey making history: when settlers came and landed on the eastern seaboard, the barley that they brought with them, it did not take and grow very well. So rye whiskey became the thing that they made when they had bumper crops. As soon as we started migrating west and got over the Appalachian Mountains, and corn we discovered grew really, really well. That's the spirit that became the soup du jour, as you will, when we had enough grain to store and make into something else. When we were looking at the raw materials available, it turns out that Washington State is an amazing breadbasket. And the Skagit Valley, just north of here, is one of the top 2% of all barley growing regions in the world. So making single malt just seemed like something that was going to be something that we were almost compelled to do. And a little bit about the brand history and the ethos. One of the founding members of the business, his family came from the timber industry, and they essentially founded the town of Oakland, Washington, as working basically in the paper and pulp mill industry. But we wanted to create a business that had this lasting legacy and a representation of the Pacific Northwest that we had been calling home for a really long time. So the imagery that comes out of it and the kind of thoughtful design of everything we do is kind of represented in many facets. So this before you is called the tree coil. That's kind of one of the things we're really proud of. It obviously, we're in the evergreen state, and so part of this design is the tree, and then you've got the distillation coils on the bottom there. And the Lamb family, one of the two founding members, the diamond was a symbol that had been a family insignia for a long time. So this became kind of our flagship symbol as we embarked into the new world. And the new world it was, because we wanted to make American single malt whiskey. And it's kind of strange to say, but we're probably one of the first American distilleries to put American single malt whiskey on the bottle. At the time, it hadn't been done. We weren't the first to make the style of spirit. McCarthy's and St. George out of St. George Spirits out of California have both been making single malt since at least the 80s, but certainly not in a way that really celebrated the style of spirit they were making. So we embarked on a new mission to make a style of whiskey that was being made across the pond, but we wanted to do so in a very much an American way. And we did that by basically approaching every step of the process and designing it from the ground up, taking a thoughtful consideration for the work that had been done for generations and hundreds of years to create the category of single malt whiskey. But we wanted to do it from the lens and the perspective of an American, So here's a brief picture of a couple of early pictures of our distillery. Wanted to give you an idea of kind of what you're looking at. We operate a double pot still distillation, very much like you would in Scotland. Our mash house is much like you would see anywhere in the Scotch whiskey industry. And maturation happens for us in dunnage style, not in these large kind of multi-story warehouse like you see in Kentucky. So there's a lot that we do that certainly is an imprint of, or a kind of a love letter to the way they make whiskey in Scotland. But certainly our mind is to making a new and more interesting and more compelling whiskey with the raw materials that are available. And fortunately, so we established this distillery that you're looking at back in 2013. It's the second facility that we built as we kind of continued to hone our proof of concept. We scaled up to this facility, making 5 whiskey barrels every single day, processing about 37,000 pounds of barley every week. Fortunately, we caught the attention of Remy Cointreau, and we were purchased by them in 2016. We have a lot in common in kind of our ethos and how we approach the business. And, you know, we have this internal mantra of thoughtfully made, and they have theirs, which is terroir, people, and time. And really all of those values lined up with who we are and who we wanted to be. And so we're really proud and excited that Remy Cointreau saw the value in what we were doing and wanted to help us grow. Unfortunately, it's been, you know, largely a hands-off sort of takeover, with us allowed to kind of continue the direction of the business. And the direction of that business is American single malt whiskey. And it was an interesting category to get into because nobody had heard of it. When you would go to a liquor store and you'd want to find where our bottle was placed, it would often be in the bourbon aisle. And that's not where single malt whiskey drinkers would go to find us. And it's not where bourbon drinkers would want to see us at that price point. So we had early on a really interesting challenge, and that's of education. So we got together with 13 other distilleries and decided to formally petition the TTB, that's the governing body for the alcohol industry, the legal alcohol industry, and ask them to create a new category that would be protected by international treaties. And that standard of identity is one that we were hoping would meet the expectations of the global whiskey consumer for single malt, but also kind of allow the innovation that American whiskey makers are really good at. And so I promise we'll get to the whiskey in the next slide, but I just wanted to preface all of this with what we're doing. So there's a little bit of reason behind the madness. So made from 100% malted barley, distilled at one distillery. Those are common Scotch whiskey terms. Mashed and distilled in America. That's simple. We want this thing to be American made. Matured in oak casks, not exceeding 700 liters. Again, that's a standard in the Scotch whiskey industry, but is one that is designed to keep the overall flavor profile roughly in line with what consumers would expect. And then the final two there you see are distilled no more than 160 proof and bottled at no less than 80 proof. And that's just, again, keeping in line with the Americans' assumptions of what whiskey is. We don't want to put vodka in a bottle and dilute it down to 20% ABV. So thinking about those standards of identity, we built them certainly around the whiskey that we have in the glass. That's our flagship whiskey, and you can certainly all dive into that. This whiskey is built off of a number of core elements that make us unique in the world of single malt whiskey. We certainly have the same raw materials overall that you would have in Scotland, but it's how we approach those that make us dramatically different. We certainly use water like anyone else. Our barley is a point of the business that we think probably more about than others, and we'll dive into that in future slides. Yeast strain, we use a Belgian Saison brewer's yeast, the Saf Ale T58, which adds a really interesting red berry ester quality to the fermenting wash, and also a phenolic character. There's a lot of clove coming out of the glass, and this is certainly the fermentation vessels. And then new American oak is another way where we depart from the conventions of making Scotch whiskey. That new American oak wraps that kind of more delicate spirit in a lot of caramel and vanilla and tannins, which you have to be thoughtful about, because it can overpower a delicate spirit like one made from barley, which is why we have approached this construction in an interesting way. So there's 6 different types of malted barley in here. 73 there's 3 different whiskeys if you want to think about it that way. The first whiskey is constructed from a mash bill of 5 different types of malted barley, 70% of which is a pale malt, much like what you've got going on in your hot steep glass. Then we've got a Munich malt using very traditional Bavarian brewer's malt, has a nice sweetness to it. Extra special malt is kilned to a higher degree and has an almost overcooked popcorn nutty-like note. And then we get our heavily roasted malts, the brown and pale chocolate. And those we import from the UK. And those provide a nice coffee, chocolatey note to the final finish of that spirit.
Do you want to get tasting notes?
I would love to get some tasting notes.
Yeah, so everybody, if you haven't already, please dive in, and we'd love to hear. I already see some stuff from Kevin, thank you. But let us know what you think. Unmute, give a shout. What are you tasting? What are you nosing?
So this new flagship is a combination of what used to be the American, the peated, and the sherry, right?
That's correct. Yeah, there is a peated component here, as well as a little bit of just a pale malt whiskey aged in ex-bourbon, and that specific component provides space in between some of the denser whiskey notes. And then we also finish some of the whiskey in Pedro Jimenez and Oloroso sherry casks.
So can you talk about the brown malt and the chocolate malt? My understanding is it's the same plant, just roasted to a different degree. Is that correct? Or is that a different type of malt?
That's exactly right. It's the same process in the overall production of malt. It's just one is roasted in that oven to a higher degree.
Is that with all of them? Oh,
Yeah.
so it's all one grain. It's just you differ the roasting, right? It's not different barley strains or anything.
That's correct. Yeah, it's just a different spectrum of the heat treatment that you've got on each of those barleys.
Although to clarify, to get really off in the weeds, because some maltsters will do some of these, but not the darker malts, correct?
Sure. So yeah, like, I mean, these are all sourced from different places and different malt houses. And yes, to their truly weedy point, there are different varietals within those, because the varieties, the malts, the brown malt and pale chocolate are sourced from Thomas Fawcett and Sons in the UK. They're probably using a variety like Concerto. That's a kind of a modern elite variety, whereas Washington Select Pale is grown here in Washington, where AAC Connect is the leading variety. But the varieties aren't going to play much of a big factor in flavor at this scale of kind of mash bill development. Once you've got a recipe that's really complex like this and has a lot of kilns and roasts, the effects and nuance of variety is going to be less easy to perceive. But yeah, there's the same single like variety malted barley that is then just roasted to different degrees. That'll give you the spectrum of flavors that are present in the glass.
I like James.
Really? When Ann and I were talking about the different expressions we were going to taste today, there was the classic 5 malt bill that is standard for you guys. And then there was also, was it a pale malt, or is it was a different malt bill on some of the single casks that you release? So how is that prevalent? How does that malt bill change the flavor at the end?
Oh, dramatically. So yeah, every bit of heat that you apply to these grains after germination is going to drive these Maillard reactions, that browning, and you're going to get increased complexity of flavors. You're going to get more nutty, malty, grainy flavors come out of it. The less kilned grain you have, it's going to be lighter in flavor, grassier, more fruity, more floral. Higher kiln, you get more malty, bran driven. I think like bran muffins, and then more kiln, you just add more layers of chocolate and nuttiness on top of that for every minute of degree that you're under that kiln temperature. You're just increasing Maillard reactions. And so the pale malt is meant to be a really nice, clean base that you can ferment, get a high yield from. And then typically you worry about maturation being your primary driver of flavor. And that's how single malt whiskey has been constructed globally forever. Your barley and your malted barley, your pale malt mash bill is really just a means to an end of getting alcohol into the cask, where then your extract and your blending can take a primary role into flavor production, or at least that's kind of how it's been framed historically. And so to actually look at barley or your kind of raw material as being a primary driver of flavor is an interesting take in the world of whiskey, and kind of a charge that we're happy to take the lead on, because we feel it makes a difference.
Yeah, so I understand how the cooking or the roasting process really could impact the flavor. Where do you? It sounds like you feel that barley variety isn't as important.
Oh no, so I guess it's a gradient or a spectrum, right? I mean, is the process or the genetics going to be more influential, right? And if you have an extreme process, it's going to overshadow some of those genetics eventually. So yeah, you've got this base substrate, and what's going to be there is going to be affected by the process. So if this variety has a higher degree of amino acids, right? Well, those amino acids under a kilning regimen are probably going to see a higher degree of Maillard reactions, because amino acids with the presence of sugar are going to undergo those browning effects. So you might see, more bready, grainy, fuller flavors from a variety that has a higher amino acid, profile based on its genetics. But broadly speaking, malt house effect is very, very noticeable. Terroir and genetics are less noticeable. It's just how well of an opportunity do you give yourself to experience those, and that's kind of the thing about what Westland is trying to do is to try to point out that, like, yeah, right now it's hard to just go out into the field and say this variety and this variety are dramatically different. Well, it's because right now all of the breeding programs are putting out genetics that are very, very similar. So until you start looking at true degrees of difference, then yeah, it's going to be easy to say that there's not that big of a difference in flavor in some of these concepts.
But we'll get to different varietals later. But we'll talk about that as a flavor vehicle. But this was sort of where Westland started, was playing with it from this sort of being inspired by brewing industry, which is really big here in the Pacific Northwest. So kind of looking at these different things where not many people had used, like pale chocolate, for example. Up until us, one brand had done one expression with it. So it's, and a little goes a long way, but it's just one way of exploring, and it was the first kind of way that we started.
Yeah, and to your point, cultural provenance is an important part of what we do. It's not just the raw ingredients, but it's the sense of place and the people that make it. So yeah, the use of the specialty malts and the Belgian yeast strain, the new American oak, all of those are influences drawn upon the place that we call home. Washington State and Pacific Northwest has been home to the craft brewing scene since the 70s. So, if our neighbors and our friends are looking at flavor in their raw materials, then, why can't we? So it's been really, really exciting because Washington State is truly an agricultural powerhouse. I mentioned earlier, we're a breadbasket. We're, I think, in the top 4 producers of wheat in the country. We're the nation's top producer of potatoes. We produce more apples than anyone else. We produce more hops than anyone else. We've got a huge berry and mint industry. Obviously, tech and aerospace and biomedical are booming from the cultural and innovation standpoint. The Palouse out on the eastern part of the state, I think, has 1.6 million acres of wheat. And so we're really excited to be able to look at what's out there and to draw upon those resources to make a really compelling whiskey. And let's see here. I talked about barley yeast, the Belgian Saison brewer's yeast, right? Lots of citrus, clove, red fruits coming off of that fermentation. Its use is unique. Usually a whiskey maker is going to use a strain that's going to yield high amounts of alcohol, ferment pretty clean, because again, the maturation part of this process is really where historically flavor production has been thought of as the primary driver. But yeast is really this incredible source of biotransformations and flavor production that's been overlooked for a long time. So we get a little bit yet less yield out of other compared to other distillers probably, but the flavor production is really unique and really incredible. And
I think we've seen over time, or at least with tastings we've done, we've seen just how much flavor yeast adds, where it's exactly to your point, it's kind of the unsung hero, right? The yeast. It's very interesting to me that you guys very prominently tell everyone what yeast you're using, whereas some of the tastings we've done, the response we get is proprietary. We don't want to tell you. We don't want someone to rip it off. What's your opinion on that? Like, because
yeah, I think there's enough that we do that's, thoughtful layers of complexity that if you were trying to replicate even a handful of them, you'll get maybe close, hopefully close, right, to replicating Westland, but it's still, there's so many pieces to this puzzle that I'm happy to share. I'll tell you that we start the fermentation at 15 degrees Celsius and cap it at 26 degrees Celsius. Like every part of that process, I'm happy to tell you how and why, because I also want anybody else on this call to make a better whiskey and help carry the flag for American whiskey makers, right? Or internationally. I think if we're all making better whiskey, then we've got better whiskey to drink. So that's the kind of important part from my perspective. And so yeah, like, and again, Northwest camaraderie and this idea of cultural innovation is something that we do really well here in the Pacific Northwest, and we're kind of shy people, and we can be cold at times, but we're also pretty easy to share things over a dram or two. So yeah, New American Oak is one of those things that defines us. We love the contributions, but it has to be done gently. So we mature everything in dunnage style warehouses in north of us in the Skagit Valley, where it's generally pretty humid, but low temperature and low temperature swings. So we don't get a lot of water evaporation over the year. It's actually more alcohol evaporation, and our proof drops. But for our style of whiskey and our casks, that lines up pretty darn nicely. We use two different New American Oak barrels, that would be Cooper Select and Cooper's Reserve. Both of these are sourced from Independent Stave Company with slow dried oak or slow growth oak. And we like them to do the air dried process, because that, of course, I'm sure you all know, helps breaks down the cask significantly. By the time we put our whiskey in there, we get a much softer whiskey with less tannin structure to it. And yeah, we love working with Independent Stave. They've got some innovative programs as well. So look for some cool single cask releases from that stuff in the future. And then we also have Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez casks. At one point, we're the largest importer of sherry casks in the United States. It was pretty hard to get, though. We had to go over literally with a briefcase of money, basically, and start knocking on doors until someone gave us the time of day. But eventually we started working with Toneleria del Sur, and they go and work really closely with the sherry houses and the bodegas, and basically allow us a really tight supply chain. So we get those casks shipped over full with shipping sherry still in them, so they're well hydrated. And as you'll see here, once we start tasting more whiskey, I'm sorry, we'll get some more of those interesting Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez specifically notes on the palate. And then Garryana, I'm not going to talk too much here because we've got a lot to talk about more with the Garryana release. But just know that those staves have to be air dried from anywhere from 3 to 5 years, because it's got such an incredible tannin content that the processing of those barrels is just impressively tough.
I don't want to keep everyone from drinking whiskey, but 2 quick questions. why Alba on the PX casks? Why not spent like European oak? And then let's start with that.
Yeah, so I mean, predominantly most of the sherry casks in Spain are made from Quercus alba.
Oh, so they ship wood from America to Spain and then ship barrels back?
Yep, it's just a better quality oak for that production process. And like Limousin and French oak has a just tighter control on the supply overall. American oak is going to be cheaper, more readily available, and just more in line with the flavor profile, and has been, gosh, since I think since at least since the 60s, but probably well before then. I mean, it's been a long time that we've been primarily sourcing, I mean, the industry has been sourcing American oak as their Spanish hogshead, which is kind of strange, but that's just the way that industry is constructed itself.
Fair enough.
Does everyone understand about air drying, understand toast, charring? Anyone have questions on that? Is everybody good?
I prefer air frying, not air drying. That's my favorite.
It's got a nice crispness to it that,
As long as you batter it first.
yeah. So let's go ahead and start tasting some more things. If you can, pour some of that delicious hot steep barley liquid into a glass. And I want to talk to you about the development of the timeline. Yeah, there we go. The timeline development for whiskey. Because so much of what we do and what Westland does, I personally think of us as being in the middle of this like 20-year-long production timeline. When you want to develop a new variety of barley, and you do it through the traditional breeding programs that exist, the American Malted Barley Association is going to be there to help you and help fund you. But the process takes about 10 years, start to finish, from the initial cross of two parents that you liked to the time that you've got a fully fledged release where Westland Distillery can make a whiskey with it. And the interesting thing is, much of that is just scaling up the genetics, trying to optimize it for disease and pest resistance. The last few years is to make sure the crops all reach the same height and it's basically genetically the same. And then right before it's done with the trials, they evaluate flavor. They say, yes, this still tastes like malted barley. They check the box and then they approve it. Provided it passes the agronomic trials, which is really the important part. If you want to farm a spring barley, it takes about 5 months. You plant that in March or April, and then mid-August you harvest. But if you want a winter variety, which farmers like because it provides a cover crop for the land, reducing soil erosion, you plant that in September, and then the roots have a chance to grow all winter long. There's a little bit of cover for the ground, again, limiting erosion. The plant has a lot of time to throw down a deeper root, so it's generally more resistant to drought. And then you harvest that a little bit earlier in July. So that process takes more time. If you want a winter variety, it's 11 months. Malting, a few weeks, but overall, start to finish, it's going to be about a month of time before that raw barley kernel has gone through steeping, germination, kilning, and then has been delivered to us for production. And then you've got milling to distilling. Again, I imagine this group is fairly savvy on the overall whiskey production process. We'll touch on it more, but milling to distilling is only 7 days, right? You mill it, you mash, 6 days of fermentation, 5 days of fermentation for us, and then a couple of days of distillation, 6 years of maturation. Overall, it can take 20 years to get something out to market. What you have in your glass is Skagit Valley malted grain. So this is coming from the Skagit Valley. It's a craft malted barley. The variety is not the variety that you see on the certificate of analysis, but I just want to talk about this in general. What you're drinking is Talisman. This is a winter 2-row variety of barley that has been malted to a British pale specification. So it's got a higher kiln level than the pale malt that you're seeing here. Oops. And what's interesting about this, on the nose for me personally, and please shout out tasting notes as you get them, but a little bit bready, but like white bread. It's not super crusty, but there's a little bit of this crust. Kind of, it's gotten some Maillard reactions. It's got some heat, but it's not a ton. A little bit of a green bean kind of a note is what I'm getting. And I often get green bean and things from barley that has been killed or roasted very, very little. So on the pale spectrum, once you kick up the temperature, it gets very, very sweet. But this is very, very light and floral and fruity almost.
Still get some Wheaties on it though.
Wheaties, absolutely, and that's a great one.
And Skagit Valley, that's the guys that just declared bankruptcy, right?
Yep. So you are drinking some really rare stuff here. Got this from the homebrew store right when I heard, so that we could all try some of their stuff.
Some of the other common notes that we get, especially when we're doing pale, which sound weird, but now that you've had this and you know, get the green bean in there, we get cucumber sometimes, some sugar snap pea, like that, those kind of green notes, which was sort of startling to me when we first did that. But this is a common practice that we do to just, I mean, we're going to talk about that right while we're doing this.
I'm going to do it right now, yeah.
I'll let Tyler continue.
So yeah, you may be saying, Tyler, why the heck am I drinking this weird barley tea? Well, every time we get in a new raw material, every time a maltster or a supplier says, hey, I've got this new variety of barley, it tastes different, it tastes unique, we're going to run it through this hot steep analysis and compare our notes. And it's pretty easy to see basically the degree of difference in flavor profiles at this stage, so that I don't have to go through and commit to mashing 5,000 pounds of barley and distilling that. I can take 50 grams of barley, do a hot steep, get the general flavor profile on it. And we've now done the hot steep, I'd say almost 400 times. And we compare on a weekly basis the hot steep analysis with the new make whiskey that we make. And we're starting to be able to figure out ways to draw conclusions and link flavor profiles together as a way to basically predict what the whiskey is going to taste like from just the barley stage. Saves us a lot of time and a lot of money. I can also, basically based off of watching how long it takes to filter, I can predict if we're going to have any issues in the brewing process. If it takes forever to brew or forever to filter, I'm going to call up my mashman and say, hey, put your boots on and get in early tomorrow, because you know you're going to have a long day of filtration time at the mash tun. And so this is a really great tool to evaluate flavor, but also performance of a new variety before we spend a lot of time and money on the actual full-scale processing of it. Because we go through about an acre of barley every single day. So to scale that up for simple testing is very difficult. So to get it in this phase and be able to make actionable decisions is really important to us.
We're getting some fun extra notes.
Oh yeah?
Lots of grassy notes, bit of crumpet, cucumber, lychee, pancake, cleaned out barn, Chex cereal with some sugar sprinkled on top, hay, Wheaties, black tea.
Yeah, oh yeah, black tea, the cleaned out barn, I totally get it. Yeah, there's that little, yeah, just minerality of the hay. So yeah, this is something we do all the time, and I've found it to be a really valuable tool. But also, I mean, if you were to, you could probably figure out ways to use this elsewhere in your life, right? If you were making a really complex soup or something and you had different spices that you wanted to figure out if they would work, you could take and make individual steeps and figure out the flavor profile of the direction of things without, you know, presumably messing up a whole batch. So this is the first stage that we as whiskey makers do. Evaluate your raw material, figure out where it's going, why you need to use it. The next stage would be milling and mashing. So the brewing process. We grind that grain into a pretty coarse flour, and we send it into our mash tun where we add hot water and that coarse ground flour. The hot water activates enzymes that have been developed during the malting process. And those enzymes go through and just chop up the long chains of starch that is barley. So the endosperm is long chains of starch, long chains of sugar, sorry, that is ultimately starch. Once that sugar has been cut up by those enzymes, you now have the sweet sugary liquid we call wort, which is slowly drawn off through the bottom of the mash tun. That process is called lautering. And at Westland, we aim to lauter off a relatively clear wort. Basically, you can target different flavor productions through your mashing procedures. Targeting a clear wort that is very low in turbidity means you're going to have a lighter flavor profile ultimately for your spirit. A more turbid wort with a lot of the barley lipids that have been extracted is going to come through with a bigger, heavier, oilier mouthfeel. And ultimately, there's a lot of considerations that Westland does, but with all of those roasted malts and things like that, targeting a clear wort is much better for our style of production. Generally, we just like the kind of lighter character. An interesting thing that we do, though, is when we want to make a whiskey designed for longer term maturation, we think about the new American oak and its really aggressive tannic flavor profile, and we want to figure out ways to kind of mitigate or get in front of that so that we can put a whiskey out in 10 plus years. And we do that by starting thinking about how to approach the whiskey in the mash tun. We'll use hotter water to extract some of the compounds from the grist in the mash tun, which leaches off more lipids and more of these heavier, oilier compounds. That again, like making a cloudy wort, give us a spirit profile after fermentation that's going to be very big, oily, viscous, and it's going to give us something that's going to have a better chance at shining in the backdrop of the tannic flavor profile of the new American white oak. So the heavy mash procedure is kind of unique. We do it for about maybe 20% of our overall production. It works really well for long-term maturation, but also our peated production. The phenolics on the smoked grain are extracted really well through this process. And overall, we generally get a little bit better yield too. So it's something that we like, but we do with a degree of moderation, just because we don't want to make something that's a little bit outweighted in the malt and grain section of its flavor profile. Fermentation.
How different would you say this barley tea would be between different distilleries?
Oh man, drastically. Well, so I guess that's a good point. So this barley tea here is a standardized method that was created by the American Society of Brewing Chemists. So I would hope that any distillery anywhere has the same exact result. But I would assume that the wort production is wildly different from every distillery based off of their grind profile and the mashing temperatures.
So this, what we're tasting here, the liquid the tea we're tasting, is literally step one. So if I reached out to 5 different single malt distilleries in the US and asked for them to send me a baggie of ground or just whole malted barley, and I ground it all myself to the same grind level and made tea out of it, it would, in theory, all taste the same.
Yeah, provided they're giving the same variety that had been killed to the same level, and the same levels of modification. So you approximate it pretty closely. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the point, is that, yeah, it's a standardized methodology for communicating flavor no matter where you are. But yeah, if the raw materials change, then certainly the hope is that the method would detect that or allow you to detect that.
And our 5 malt would taste drastically different, as you would assume, because it has different kiln barleys in it, etc. So it doesn't taste like this. But
so why aren't we tasting the 5 malt?
This is a better conversation to lead into the Colere release that we've got.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So yeah. This would be what your pale malt would be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So more what you would get from Scottish distilleries.
Exactly.
I do have well, and you don't have to answer it now, you can answer it later, but why virgin American oak if if American single malt is so based on traditions of Scotland, why not use ex-bourbon barrels? Why use virgin oak?
Yeah, the flavor is good. You know, the caramel, the vanilla, those baking spices, a little bit of toasted coconut, all of those things are really intriguing flavors. And from the perspective of the Scotch whiskey makers, those are also intense, and the tannin profile can be too intense for the barley spirit that's a little bit lighter. And that's true if all you're making is a spirit based off of pale malt. But if you have roasted and kiln malts or a different yeast profile, you probably are designing a spirit that can stand up to that in a different fashion. And that's what we hope we're doing here, is showcasing that, like, yeah, certainly there's a way that's been done, and they've kind of designed their key to fit through the hole that they want. But we've just built a whole new door instead that has a different handle, a different latch, rather than going into the same door as them. We'll just figure out all the same ingredients, but reconstruct it in a way that's more representative of what we like to drink.
But to be clear though, too, we have ex-bourbon barrels, we have reused Westland casks, we have all these other flavors as well, and not everything gets put in the same cask. So if we're doing 5 malt, that'll go usually a new oak, but can go in other things as well. We're going to taste one tonight that has been fully matured in another cask. We have things that go in ex-bourbon as well, or reused casks, or whatever. We want to create a wide variety of things, so our master blender has a wide palette to play with. Because you do need some of those ex-bourbons, and especially when you use Colere, which I never get to, but we don't want to cover up flavors with that, but you also need some of those ex-bourbons to create space, and so it's not too much of a flavor bomb, so you need that in certain blends as well. So it's not, when we say that we focus on virgin oak, it's not only that. Just want to be clear on that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just one of the points of early differentiation that kind of set us apart. But yeah, we have 68 different cask types, unique cask types in the warehouse right now. 7,600 barrels overall. So yeah, we've got a lot of different flavor profiles to play from. Yeah, so touching real quickly, fermentation, obviously a big driver in flavor. One of the things that yeast does is it consumes all of the sugar that we've extracted from that mashing process. The yeast consumes the sugar. Byproduct is alcohol, flavor that we love, but also CO2. And I'm really proud of this. We've just installed some new carbon capture technology. So it is connected to the back of these tanks here. It scrubs all of the fermentation gases clean, compresses it into a liquid beverage grade CO2 that we can then sell back into the brewers market. And then brewers can use it to carbonate their beers, which is pretty exciting because all of the CO2 that you'll have in your soda or beer or really anywhere is a byproduct of the petrochemical industry. So to be able to offer for the first time a carbon neutral carbon dioxide is a really unique thing, but exciting. And so we're really excited that this is the first time that any distillery in the country has this technology. And it's the first time that it's been kind of down to the scale. Usually it's been something that only would be attainable for like Molson Coors or something of really gigantic scale. So a lot of these efforts have been fortunately recognized by others. Last year, we got World Whiskey Awards Sustainable Distillery of the Year. A lot of that has to do with the carbon capture system that we're installing, but also some of the fun work that we're doing with barley. And let's talk more about barley. Let's dive into the Colere sample of whiskey that you've got in front of you. So Colere, this means to cultivate, and this is the first release, well, not the first release, one of the releases in our Outpost range that we're really excited about. And the Outpost range is all about really looking forward and planting new flags of exploration in the world of single malt, in the world of whiskey making, quite frankly. Our flagship whiskey was innovative because of the specialty malts, the Belgian yeast strain, and the new American oak. Colere is innovative because of our approach to agriculture. We are looking at whether or not agricultural practices affect the flavor of whiskey. We're looking at regenerative techniques, organic techniques, salmon safe certified farming practices. We're exploring differences in barley varieties and their inherent flavors, whether that's an heirloom or a modern elite. We're looking at color and trying to identify whether or not there's effects of flavor that are relatively that are related to the color of the barley kernel. Terroir, vintage, all of these are really kind of wild concepts in the world of single malt or really whiskey making for that matter. But it's going to be something that you'll see presented now and in the future in the glass in front of you. So Colere, this third edition, features the pilot variety of barley. This was developed in a German breeding program, but wasn't doing too well, if I'm being honest. The stats weren't looking good, but farmers up north in the Skagit Valley, where you see here in this picture, were looking at the data, and they realized that there might be some malting potential, and it might actually work well in their specific growing regions. So they got some seed in and started growing it, and now there's 4 farmers in the Skagit Valley that are the only people growing this variety of barley. It's a semi-dwarf variety, meaning it grows to about 1.5 foot tall at most, which is really important for the farmers there, because really tall varieties, will fall over in the wind in what's called lodging. So identifying varieties that are adapted to grow well in their specific climate, but also stand up to the various threats of either disease or pests is really an important challenge for farmers, because growing barley is incredibly hard. Growing malted barley is even harder because you have very specific narrow range of specifications that brewers and distillers will generally accept as malt grade. A farmer generally has 40 to 50 attempts to do their job right in their lifetime, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but if I was a bartender and I wanted to make Manhattan and I messed up, I could dump it out and quickly, within 30 seconds, make a new cocktail. But a farmer, he only has 30, 40, 50 chances from the time he takes over the family farm to the time he retires to get that planting just right in the springtime, to get his fertilizer application just right, to optimize his yield, to figure out the pest management just right so that his crop isn't lost that year. And each year represents another single attempt at doing the job right. And almost all of those farmers have loans, have their house up against, that crop. And if they fail, there's a lot on the line. And so Westland is really working hard to try and internalize some of the risks that farmers face, because it can be hard and scary to farm barley. And there's less and less acreage being planted in barley every year because there's not enough money in it. So Westland is trying to figure out ways that we can challenge the system and do better. This is Dr. Steve Jones. He works with the bread lab that's established by the Washington State University here in the Skagit Valley. And he has basically dedicated his latter part of the career to developing regionally adapted crops that yield well in low input organic systems that are both nutritious and flavorful. And it's something that should be taken for granted or taken as status quo, but unfortunately it's not. He was working for the breeding program on the eastern half of the state where he was working on wheat. But when the program wanted him to develop Roundup ready crops of wheat, he said, no, thank you. And basically his job ended there. And he ended up going to the Skagit Valley, where he's working with farmers who grow 83 different unique crops within this small valley. Not all the farmers grow 83 crops, but there's an incredible number of crops grown in this small region. And barley is like the 83rd least important. But it's interesting because they like it. They like to grow barley because it's great for their crop rotations. tulips are grown almost, I think, more in the Skagit Valley than anywhere else in the world outside of the Netherlands. And tulips are incredibly demanding on the soil. They draw with it a lot of nitrogen. And so the farmers need crop rotation like barley, which fixes nitrogen back into the soil in order to keep their farms healthy and their profits high. But if there's nobody buying barley, then there's nobody buying that crop, and it's not worth planting. So Steve Jones is working with new malt houses, the one that unfortunately just went under, to develop local barley varieties. And then we'll have a local malt house take those crops and provide them to distillers like us. Barley breeding is challenging. These crops self-pollinate, so the genetics don't spread willy-nilly. So you have to literally take tweezers from the crop that you like, from the plant that you like, and move the genetics to another parent that you do like. Hopefully, so then the new plant will scale up the genetics that you like, but you have to do that over and over and over again until you get these test plots. They're about 4 foot by 12 foot. And after about 4 years of scaling up these new genetics, you get a test plot where you can start testing the agronomic yield of these things. So it's an incredibly challenging process, right? I talked about 10-year timeline for the ANBA approval. We're working to see if we can't shorten this process to develop something that looks like this, something that's beautiful and flavorful. And we hope that this is going to be the future of barley and the future of the whiskey in your glass. But it's going to take time. And we're going quite against the grain to get these beautiful photos and to get these beautiful crops. But we're hoping that eventually we can find a solution for farmers that yields really well, makes interesting flavors, and then we as whiskey makers will find a way to really make something compelling out of that.
Colere varieties tastes different, right? So
yeah,
if you had done a barley tea, comparing those, it was taste different. So bread would taste different. Everything you make out of it would taste different.
absolutely.
Okay. So
You know
like
that
the distilled spirit takes I mean, I assume it takes a lot of the flavor out of it. Whereas like the closer you are to the source, the more flavorful the more of the flavor you can taste.
yeah, and that's certainly true to a degree. On the other side of the spectrum, distillation is a process of concentration, right? Selective concentration. So there are certain ways that, or certain elements of the raw material that you're going to lose throughout the processing. The princess and the pea, right? How many layers of mattresses between you and the thing that you're trying to experience are you? It may be obscured, but there are also times where the more mattresses make those slight variations greater and greater and greater, the more layers that you put over it. And so you'll still be able to experience them. At least on the distillate side, it's still pretty clear that there's variation in variety flavor. But there's nuances, right? And it's a lot of nuance. And then maturation is what really takes this for a ride. And so for us, we always try to mature these new varieties, these new explorative projects in ex-bourbon casks. That way we're not letting the oak do the driving of the flavor profile. To date, we've probably distilled, this slide says 20, but over 30 different unique barley varieties, which is probably, more than what the Scotch whiskey industry has done in that same time period. And it's an exploration that's done with intent. We're not looking to just try every variety under the sun, because quite frankly, a lot of them taste very similar. We want to do something that works well for the farmer, works well for our maltster and our supply chain, and ultimately provides you guys with a compelling flavor in the glass. And if a variety doesn't do those things, then we're going to move on and work to develop a new one.
I think if you were to have the first or second edition of Colere and have them side by side, it's a little easier to sort of discern the differences. Which certainly if you were to try this against, maybe a Scotch and an ex-bourbon, you would still notice some of that too, but at least that way you'd have sort of a one-to-one comparison. But it is interesting having those side by side, because Alba and Talisman, the first two editions, taste quite different. One has more of like a hay barn kind of note, the other one has a little bit more like floral lateness, I thought. But
Yeah. And with the Colere 3 that you've got in your glass, to be fair, there was actually a fairly heavy biscuity grain-like quality coming out of it. And so after its initial maturation in ex-bourbon, we felt strongly that it could stand up to Oloroso sherry. So that's what you're experiencing. It's got a little Oloroso finish on it. Primary maturation was ex-bourbon for this pale variety of pilot malt. And then, yeah, a little bit of Oloroso maturation on the finish, because those soft stewed stone fruit notes aren't kind of overpowering the grain note that's really driving this whiskey.
Getting some really good tasting notes.
Oh yeah,
Oh my gosh. Toasted bread, sawdust, green apple, fig, honey, citrus notes, dusty oak, biscuity bread, blackberry muffin. Let's see, I like the sleepy time tea, Walker's biscuits, red berries, mint, vanilla, grain, grass, lemongrass, honey crisp, apple. Oh my gosh, so many things. Hint of thyme, cherry. Like,
yeah,
good things.
that's great. Yeah, I really love this whiskey. It's nice, easy drinking. It's a great summer whiskey too. For the kind of hot weather and sunny days. It's nice and clean, but still bright and really hits home.
So when you distill these unique varietals, how do you age them to keep the essence of the uniqueness of the variety separate? Because there's one approach to age it and blend it to be a delicious whiskey to sell to the market, and another, which is the scientific nerdy one of I want to age it and taste 20 different varietals. And how do you, that's got to be a head scratcher, right? How do you do that? Because every cask is different. So
Yeah.
even you can do the same barley in two different casks. That's the whole point of a single cask program, that you're going to taste differently. So how can you say 5 years down the line that this one tastes like the purple one because whatever,
Right. Yeah. No, those are great questions. So yeah, like trying to design the maturation program to set yourself up for success is certainly the way to go. So yeah, first start, everything is going to be ex bourbon, or really we would prefer ex Westland maturation. So its first life is the pale malt. That way we have full control over that supply line. We know how old it is, and we know all of the variables. And then the next is, how you approach it, kind of as you assemble it and put it and get it ready for market. Do you want to just put forward a great tasting whiskey, or do you want to run a science experiment? And, those can be the same thing, but oftentimes those aren't. Those are very different approaches. And because, the consumer also wants something that they can get, in Boston and Seattle, and they want it to be consistent. Or at least they want to know that they're going to be expecting a change. And so that's what we're hoping to do, is at least get our customers knowing that this is an evolution, it's an exploration, and each iteration is going to be slightly different. The first two releases of this were completely ex-bourbon maturation, but this one does have that Oloroso sherry cask, because the whiskey is kind of leading the way. And we aren't necessarily going to ever be the research facility distillery that I want us to be. Quite frankly, I would love it if we could. But there's also we've distilled 30 different varieties already, and we have one Colere release a year. What avenues are there for all of these products? So we have to just be mindful of that and try to do it in a way that is compelling and interesting for everybody involved. But yeah, I think we're going to be continuing ex-bourbon maturation and really let the whiskey point in its direction. And if it's exciting, then hopefully it'll jump out of the glass. And if it's not, then it might need our assistance. Let's jump right into another glass and take a walk through a wonderful Garryana forest. Quercus Garryana is the only native oak species in the Pacific Northwest. So we can all cram together a Garryana 7th edition. Quercus garryana, unlike Quercus alba, which is American white oak, which has general, notes of caramel, baking spices, vanilla, toasted coconut. Quercus garryana is much more intense. It has molasses, it has clove, blueberry syrup, and Kansas City barbecue smoke. And it has one of the highest tannin concentrations of any oak species that's currently being made for whiskey production. So it's very, very bitter. These staves, as mentioned on a previous slide, but only really quickly, are air dried anywhere from 3 to 5 years, because it just takes so much time for the breakdown of the tannin structure to really soften up and allow us to get an approachable whiskey. These trees are really, really special. They grow from basically the southern tip of BC all the way down to the middle of California. They are incredibly drought tolerant. They're also really tolerant to flooding. They've got one of the deepest tap roots of any oak species and one of the deepest roots systems of any of the tree species here in the Northwest. But that's also a challenge for us as whiskey makers because there's not very much of it left. And it's less than 5% of its original habitat, and you can't legally harvest it anymore. You have to wait until it's about to fall over on someone's house or already has been blown down in a windstorm before we can go and get the oak to make staves and then barrels. It's really, really interesting species. It's very, very strong, but also kind of brittle. It's prone to warping and checking. So making barrels out of it is very, very, very difficult. They're probably, to be honest, the barrels made out of Quercus garryana are more rare than Mizunara oak are in the world of whiskey making, just because the oak species is probably more rare, and it's just as difficult to make barrels from these things as from Mizunara. So there's not a lot out there. I think we only have about 150 total in our warehouse. So this release in your glass, it's our 5 malt flagship mash bill, a little bit of peated. We mature it in 46% of it is going to be in Quercus garryana. There's also a little bit of ex-bourbon cask, again, to provide some much needed space in between some of those tighter notes. And this features some Washington red wine, Syrah and Cabernet maturation too. So those, the peated component and the Washington wine both play off of the smoky note that's inherently in the oak, but also that kind of berry syrup note. And every year we're going to do a different expression of Garryana, highlight something else that we think is unique and interesting about the story of this really incredible oak species. So what do you guys all think? I've been kind of talking about just the species and what it is, but what do you guys think about the whiskey in the glass?
A lot of good notes, but I want people to talk about it aloud.
Like this. I've never had any whiskey that was aged in a wine this good. With wine. I'm not generally a finished whiskey guy of any kind, and I really like this a lot.
Oh, great. Nice.
We're getting the blackberry, the blueberry, pine, mint, peat, spice, some mild sweetness, the bitter note, which I think is real. That's the Garryana coming through. Smoky spice, fig, pear, molasses, winter mint, all sorts of you guys are nailing it. Clove, yeah, absolutely.
Yep. This was kind of hard for me to track down because it doesn't technically exist anymore, but Oregon Barrel Works, they're a barrel manufacturer that we don't actually use, but they a while back had hired Dr. Jim Swan to evaluate Oregon oak. And so he did some research in it and they had put it up on their website about 10 years ago, but then updated the website and they took this information down, but I found it. Anyway, Oregon oak has a lot of isoeugenol and eugenol, which is responsible for that clove note, and you know, a little bit lower on the vanillin, almost no cis oak lactones, no coconut there. It's a really strange species, more in line with some of the French oak kind of components that you might see, but really just it's bold. We've only ever released 3 single casks on its own. Cask 115, 117, 16, and 18, I think. But yeah, since then you can look for Garryana as being the sole output of the Garryana casks. And they're really hard to come by. Like I said, you can't cut them down. A couple of years ago, we had to go down to Oregon, and I was literally putting up wanted ads and posters on tack and feed stores in the backwoods of Oregon. And the picture in the bottom right there is from, we took that on a farmer's house. There's a Mennonite farmer that we met, and he had a stand of Oregon oak, probably 50 or so trees on his land that occasionally he would cut one down every time his nearby neighbor needed a new roof for his barn. He would fire up the mill, plane off some lumber, and eventually we convinced him to sell us some of the timber, because he was really, as a Mennonite, did not want to be associated with alcohol production. But we assured him that we were providing jobs and a much needed life for the oak that was better than the fence posts or the fire that was going to be destined for. So it's hard to come by, and we put a lot of work into developing the supply chain for this. And we've gone out now for several years and planted new Oregon oak trees. Oregon oak is another name for it, especially if you're in Oregon. So yeah, we planted around almost 700 of these trees as a way to help give back. They're really slow growing, and so much so that most people don't want to plant them ornamentally in their yards. So it's just another reason why there's less and less of these oak savannas around. But they've been incredibly important for the region. Down near the Air Force Base that we have here, there's a large oak savanna that was developed by the Native Americans hundreds and thousands of years ago, hundreds or thousands of years ago, I should say. They started burning the grasslands below the savannas to encourage deer to populate in the grasslands that would then eat the acorns that fell off of these trees. And they're really good at living in a bunch of different variety of conditions except shade. When Mr. Douglas fir comes along and wants to grow next to them, they will kill these Oregon oak trees faster than you can possibly believe with just a little bit of shade. So the practice of prescribed burning was developed by Native Americans to keep these oak savannas healthy and vibrant, and provided them with a lot of hunting grounds and all sorts of resources. Let's move on to one of the most exciting whiskeys that you'll have in front of you in a long time, if I'm going to be honest, is our Solum. And I'm super excited because this just won a big award from Whiskey Magazine's World Whiskey Awards. We've got top honors as the best American single malt. So peated whiskey, as I'm sure you're all aware, has been the barley has been dried after germination over a fire of peat moss. That imparts a really rich, smoky component to the barley. And we are very fortunate here in Washington State to have a peat bog. This peat bog is the one you're looking at, is the one that made the peat in the glass. It's here in Washington. All we had to do is Google it, and it was like, bing, here you are. There's a backhoe that will harvest some of this peat, which is essentially just decaying swamp matter. That decaying swamp matter is more or less the botanicals that line the bog. There's a lot of cedar, Douglas fir, Labrador tea, which is this waist-high shrubbery that looks a lot like rosemary, but has a more citrusy kind of quality to it. There's bog cranberries, there's sedge grasses and sphagnum mosses, and all of these elements will fall into this bog, and without the ability for oxygen to get down and break down these organic components, they sit there and they rest for hundreds and thousands of years, and eventually someone with a backhoe comes, scoops them out, and decides to light it on fire. And then we get to make some really, really killer whiskey with it. So unlike the landscape that you're going to see in Scotland and in Islay particularly, where it's just rolling hills of moss after moss after moss, botanical profile here is different, and so it's going to lead to a different botanical profile in the whiskey itself. And I am very curious to see and hear what you guys all think about the smoke and the quality of what you got.
Smoky and muffiny.
Smoky and muffiny.
Getting nutty on
Nutty,
those.
yeah.
It's funny, you would not think you would ever eat moss, but if you've ever worked with dried moss in any quantity, this tastes exactly like it smells, with a bunch of lavender tossed on top of it.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's not going to be, I don't certainly get the same level of medicinal kind of components that I would from, like, you know, some of the Islay peats. It's much more earthy, mossy, leathery, a little bit of petrichor, you know, that smell after it rains. Really, really nice. Ex-bourbon maturation on this, again, to let the grain and that peat component shine through. This is going to be, I think, just over 40 months maturation. And really, this is exciting because I think it's provenance in a bottle. And what I mean by that is, I'll show you. I want to go back to this slide here, where it may be hard for some of you to see, but you've got the various regions of peat production highlighted there in the red dots are all the different peat bogs surrounding the state. Down in the southwestern part of Puget Sound, we've got all of our peat bogs. We've also got, yeah, there you go. How did that happen? The hearts. Did you see the hearts pop up?
That was me. Bottom left, there's an annotate button.
Look at that. So cool.
Bottom left of the screen, there's a little pen that says annotate. You should be able to annotate stuff.
Oh my God.
So you've just blown his mind.
Yeah.
Hey, it's only fair.
Cool.
Oh, now it's permanently there.
Nope. And then I can clear it. Hold on.
That's so neat.
There we go.
Wow. All right. All right. I love it. So yeah, our peat bog is down here. A lot of the barley that we harvested specifically for this whiskey is up here. There's also peat bogs there. But what I'm really excited about, and Anna already knows this, and this is dumb. This is so dumb. But well, there's one thing that you can do if you want to really enjoy your peat whiskey, and also you have oysters on hand, is to dab a little bit of your peated whiskey onto your oyster before you shoot it. Now the peat bog, and this is like, I'm not making this up. You do this with Oscar and Islay whiskeys all the time. But the peat bog is literally in between two oyster farms. And the barley farm up north is literally like a mile away from other oyster farms. So like at some point, our bogs were also oyster bearing lands, and they're all one and the same. And so like to have the food that you are eating and the glass that you're drinking all be basically harvested and grown and made in the same place, it's really exciting. And I don't know, like I don't know how you could possibly describe a place better than than lighting it in fire and putting it in the bottle. I mean, you probably could, but I'm really excited about this release. I think it really voices to the flavors, the mood of what we're doing, and yeah, I'm excited to share it with you all.
It's really fun to see how this kind of relates back to what you were doing a lot with the peated release, where you were importing the peated malt. And you can kind of see at least the same ethos there in the whiskey, but this is more cohesive in my mind. I just love it. It makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we stopped importing that peated malt in 2019 because it stopped making sense for who Westland was becoming and who we wanted to be, right? So to have the opportunity to make a peated whiskey with the local product like this is really exciting. So yeah, I'm glad it's resonating with you.
And the local peat clearly resonates with the local grain. I mean, everybody will tell you I hate peat. This is very nice. I really like it, and that's probably the first time I've ever said that about a peated product. So yeah.
I was gonna say that, Kate. I noticed. I was like, "What? Kate likes it."
That's a big deal. And it's a big deal to us, and it's a big deal to share. I mean, this is the first time that, you know, a Native American peat has been released on a national scale. And so, yeah, we're really excited for this opportunity. We don't have any samples to taste today, but I just wanted to also talk about some of the cool projects that we're doing, specifically with our cask exchange program. So we'll take whiskey, and we're always getting requests from local brewers who want to age their beer in it. And we're very, very excited to work with our brothers in Barley and share these materials that we have so that they don't have to go all the way to Kentucky to get the barrels they're looking for. And what's exciting about this program is that we don't ask that they make anything in particular. If they want to make a saison or a cherry sour or a porter or a barrel of an imperial stout, they have carte blanche to do what they want. We just ask that when they're done, we get the barrel back, and then we can finish a whiskey in that barrel. And so that gives us a lot of opportunities, both to kind of keep a sustainable supply chain of barrels for our local brewing community, but also an opportunity to tell some really great stories and collaborate with folks that we take a lot of pride knowing and honestly a lot of influence from their creativity. So we've got the next cast coming up is from Cloudburst Brewing, and this is going to be released on a fairly large scale, right?
Yeah, so it'll be released at least at the distillery on the 26th of August, and then it'll be in Washington State. So you do still need to come visit us or something. But anyway, yeah, so it's not only in the distillery, but it will be mostly here.
So look for cool stuff.
Tyler, do you ever think Washington will adjust their laws up there for the taxation of alcohol versus wine and beer?
Oh, we're fighting so hard. We are fighting so hard for that, Tony. I wish it would happen soon. You know, that was kind of one of the unfortunate things about the privatization is that our taxes got hiked on us real hard. So we're actively going and lobbying right now to try and see if we can't reduce that and get better parity with the brewers and wineries of the state. But we'll see. You know, it's easy money right now for the state to have. So
I know. I wish you luck on it. I was up there visiting my brother-in-law, and I bought a bottle of liquor, and I was like, "Wait a minute, how much is this?" And then they told me that and a liter tax. And I was like, okay, how many different types taxes can you put on one good?
Too many. There's a good person tax, I'm sure of it. Well, let's drown our sorrows and try to come up out of this, and let's taste through a little bit of a single cask offering here. Starting with, let's do 1754. I want to get your all your opinion on what we've got in this glass here. It is the spirit type that went into this is our 5 malt grain bill. This is kind of a unique one for us because the cask type is Madeira, so this is a fortified wine coming from Portugal, but it was matured for its entire 7 years in the Madeira cask. Not just to finish, but all 7 years were in this big bad boy. So I'm really curious to know more about what you all think about this. It's not an approach we normally take, so I'm super excited to share it.
Can you tell us why some of these bottles have screw tops and some of them have forks?
Changeover. Yeah. So we made a decision years ago to go towards a screw top. The thinking being was that it would never fail. Some of the whiskey, one of the whiskey distillers we were also being distributed with at the time had a similar closure, and we really liked it. We thought it was slick, and we didn't want cork taint or a failure of a cork to affect our whiskey. The problem was couldn't get them open. There was an issue where the surface on the inside was too rough, and so after closing, you could never almost open it. You needed a pair of vice grips. So we were moving away from the screw top and towards the T-top cork. So yeah, we're in a transitionary period of dry goods right now, and you'll kind of see that spectrum of products over the next year, but we'll get that tightened up pretty soon.
But corks are here to stay, is the answer to your question, so you can retire your vice grips for its intended use.
I like the screw top. I thought it was, you guys were leading the way for screw tops.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we still use them here at the distillery for water bottles, in the cask or in the tasting room, but yeah, it's tough.
These corks are hard to get back in there. They're stiff.
This is an American sherry bomb.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
it here.
Yeah, this one, by the way, just so everybody knows, this was something that Vadim requested specifically. So if you love it or hate it, it's on Vadim.
The second option is not an option. You love it. You're welcome.
Yeah, Madeira is a type of fortified wine coming from off one of the islands of Portugal. It's fortified with neutral grape spirits. But what's interesting about this compared to other fortified wine styles is that they encourage the oxidation through exposure to heat and movement, based off of how it was traditionally transported as a style, in ships. And so the heat and the movement is something that makes this style kind of unique. But man, this is a big whiskey.
There's a really interesting thing on the finish that it's sweet, but also, I don't know if tannic is the right word, but there's some astringency there there's a lot.
I get like soy sauce.
Absolutely, there's astringency and it is sweet, and it's a beautiful Madeira cask. I like it a lot. Bull Run does one as well, and I'm in Oregon. I live in Oregon, so I love theirs. Yours is equally as wonderful.
Nice, thank you.
I want to go get, I have a bottle of Balvenie Madeira cask, and I want to get that and compare the two.
Oh boy,
That'd be fun.
that'll be really interesting. 5 malt against their pale malt.
Yep.
Is it
going to be 40% versus 53.4? So add a splash of water.
the label that Vadim printed out says 53.4%.
Yep.
Is it 53.4 or is it 53.1?
53.4.
Okay. Not that it matters, I'm just asking.
That's fine. I think I got mine. Oh yeah, I had. Looks like I wrote that down wrong at some point. Cool. Sorry.
Yeah, the 7525 was 53.1.
You'll forgive us.
Yeah.
The
No. My reputation.
Yeah, sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
We can be bribed.
Oh, there's some really interesting notes coming in, which I like. Lots of the soy sauce, sulfur kettle corn, apple jolly rancher, salted plums, raisins, miso paste, dark stewed red fruits. I love those notes, Jane. I always love your notes. I'm not going to read Christopher's. That's fine.
Yeah, that's a heavy hitter.
Yeah, that's a big way.
Well, let's see how these other two finish off the palette here. 2 head. All right, let's go through with the 7525. Ex-bourbon and Pedro Jimenez. This is the 5 malt spirit type.
Oh, so this was a finish instead of a.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Ooh.
This seems so gentle in comparison. Wow, at least on the nose.
The word you're looking for is weak.
Wow, okay.
Okay. The Balvenie is 86 proof, but 15 years old.
Oh, all right.
It's also a finish in Madeira versus this is exclusively Madeira, so you're gonna get a lot more Madeira.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Definitely some more nutty.
The nose on the PX is so different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're all probably somewhat familiar with Pedro Jimenez, but it's a style of fortified wine where they harvest the grapes and then they let them dry out in the sun. They raisinate prior to making the wine, and then it's fortified. So yeah, that the raisination of that grapes really intensifies the sugars in there quite a bit. Ooh. Oh yeah, nutty.
We can't let it go by. He just said raisination. That's an incredible word.
I mean, I feel like I get that on the end a lot. Like it's a lot of nuttiness up front and then some more of that raisin on the back end.
Raisin juice.
And some baking spices just kicking through the finish there.
Anna, we can hear you talking about us. A lot of nuttiness up front and some raisins in the back.
Y'all gotta stay hydrated, okay?
Who are you calling a raisin?
I heard someone call flies the other day sky raisins.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That is a good one.
And then they're saying that their dog ate a jalapeno sky raisin. What do you mean a bee?
A lot of syllables. To be. Okay.
Oh yeah, this is a good whiskey though.
Angry sky raisin, a wasp. Yes. I agree with you, Jason.
Totally.
Oh, amazing.
All right.
Any other comments on this one? We'll talk about all of them comparatively at the end, but curious.
I'm curious as to why you had us do the Madeira before this one, because I feel like this one we should have done before the Madeira.
Okay, so I have an answer for that one. You can totally blame me. The answer is, this is the first time I am trying these whiskeys.
Oh, okay.
These were not available to us until we got the kit as well. So I was only basing it off of the type of wines and some of my experiences. Madeira has been a lighter start, which is why I thought that would be appropriate. So apologies, that was incorrect.
Yeah, no. That's a solid answer, and I'm not even going to be angry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one is definitely more flavor bomby than the Madeira one was.
But the Madeira had that more, I don't know, tannic edge to it. So I feel like
Yeah.
this is a mellower one compared to that one.
Jane,
These
thank
are-
you for that. There's no wrong order, just more chances to do it again in a different order. Yes.
Yeah, this definitely would go before, but I love this one too. This is very good.
So are you guys on the port or are you moving on to the port now?
I'm on the 75-25.
Or you're still on the PX? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think I could drink it in the same order and not really have a problem with it. Because the PX is definitely, to me, a little fuller of a flavor.
Mhm.
It's not as complex as the Madeira, but it's just as good. So, no harm, no foul. I think you did fine.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh, I'm just gonna say, yeah, I think that last comment's right. The structure of it, like, yeah, the Madeira is certainly big, but the PX has enough weight to it, enough also the sweetness. There's a nice follow-up to the tannin structure actually of the Madeira.
Christopher, please ask your question.
Okay, so I noticed that you guys have an incredible consistency with the ABV. Why is that? We were talking about within a percentage point. Is there a reason for that you can speak to?
They're also not all like that. That's just
Okay.
how these are.
Yeah. Overall, we're really consistent. So we always fill a used cooperage at 125 proof or 62.5% ABV. All new cooperage gets filled at 55% ABV or 110 proof. And that's just to favor the different range of extracts. But I mean, the entry proof is always going to be the same. Our rack houses, even though we've got 3 of them, are all identical in size and shape. And they're only being stacked 4 high. So there's not a lot of temperature variation anywhere on the property, really. So at least that's one factor of consistency.
Perfect. Thanks. That's really helpful.
So one tradition that we have before we completely finish out, we like to take a full picture. So can you stop screen sharing for a moment?
Yeah.
Please?
How do I do that?
I got you.
Yeah, I need your help.
I got you. No worries.
That's
My job. Keeping people out is my job. Yeah, thank you for that, Nana. I didn't want, you were having such a fun time. Everyone's getting ready. Everyone's coming on camera, grabbing a drink. I like it. I love it. People know what they're doing. Adam, we're waiting on you. And Lucas. All right. Let me open the screen grab thing. Dragging my feet. Come on, Lucas, come back. But Tyler, thank you so. There we go. We got Adam. Let's go for 100%. There we go. Yeah. All right. Raise the glass. Tyler, Anna, of course, amazing. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you everyone else for joining us. And cheers to Westland. Cheers to Tyler. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you all.
Beautiful.
Got it?
Yep. Oh, that's a wonderful shot.
All right. Okay. Port. Do it.
Port.
Dessert drink.
Dessert. Sorry. Feeling silly. Oh yeah.
I'm working on the polls. Should I even include the flagship? I feel like that's not going to be a fair fight.
I feel like you're probably right, but why not include it just to see? Maybe it'll surprise us.
It's a stunner.
So this port, compared to the last 2, I feel like this port is very light. But I'm not saying it's a light type of whiskey and flavor profile. It's just compared to the last 2. But this is so nice.
Because you've had the other 2 already? No,
Yeah. I feel like I have to go and try them in different orders now, or just try them all by themselves. But this is very pleasant.
it is really nice. It doesn't
Yeah.
have a lot of edges to it. I feel like it's pretty well rounded.
That's it, exactly, yeah.
A little more of the like red hard candy, kind of a cherry fruit note to it. I'm not getting full like cough syrup, but there's
Yeah,
an element that's starting to flirt that direction.
For a 7-year-old though, this is really, really good.
Why, thank you. Oh gosh,
Oh, man.
tough. All right, you're voting? Did you already vote?
I voted.
You already voted.
I haven't
Ah.
voted.
I know what it is about this one that it's finally come to me that the Madeira, to me, it was just overwhelmingly Madeira, and it tasted like a very strong Madeira, right? Because it's whiskey. But it was just, I didn't taste the whiskey as much as I tasted the Madeira. And then the Cask 25, the PX, very nutty, right? So very Pedro Jimenez. This one, I feel like there's much more balance between the port and the whiskey on this one. I think that's what it is that I'm
Which is strange because the
tuning into.
PX is a finish and this is a full maturation.
Yeah. That's me. That's my opinion. I'm curious to hear what other people say.
Did everybody vote? Oh, by the way, don't leave. I have stuff to give away.
Well, my opinion on
you're
what
right,
she just
Jake.
said. My opinion on what you just said is I think the Madeira was beautiful, and of the three, that was my pick.
All right. One more vote. Who hasn't voted?
I'll vote again if that makes any difference.
If it lets you, try it. There you go. You're able to. All right, I'm gonna end that one. For the giggles, you guys remember the 3 special editions? All right, tell me which one you like the most.
Oh, damn.
Choose between your children, Tyler.
We all know he's waiting for the overall poll just to choose the flagship.
A company man.
Make sure.
Just as I launch that one, you get a little notification. HR has entered the chat.
Oh, so weird.
It's very hard. It's very hard. I don't know if anybody else is struggling here, but
I mean, that's what we're hoping for. We want
Yeah.
this to be, you know, a difficult decision between all the different facets of whiskey making, right? Like that's all these different things that we're looking at, all these flavor levers that we're able to pull. So
yeah.
we like them for all different reasons, right?
Exactly, and for all different circumstances. So it's a tough one. All
On
right.
these picks of 3, I do wish there was a way that you could like rate them rather than just pick your favorite. Because well, I don't get to vote anyway, but it'd be an interesting.
What is that like called? Like ranked voting, or what is that called?
Ranked choice.
Ranked choice.
Yeah.
Ranked choice.
Let's not do that. We'll be here 2 weeks to figure out who.
You got whiskey, you're fine. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
But then you got to rank it for, you know, when you're in a mellow mood or when you're in a excited mood or when you're in a celebratory mood. Yeah, it's
In the right now mood. So what are we looking at, Tyler? This is the warehouse.
Yeah. Oh, this is one of our first warehouses, and I just put this up because now we're at a part of the conversation we're all just gathering around and chatting, and it felt like an appropriate background picture.
All you're missing is a fire pit in the middle, but I don't think that would be.
That would only happen once.
Alert. But I will tell you guys, if you look at how all these barrels are arranged, they are arranged and ordered lengthwise down that rack house. That is an incredibly inefficient way to do it. Because if you want to get any barrels off the middle, what do? You
That's
gotta
the strongest person. Oh, in the middle of like at the bottom in the middle.
Yeah. If you do your sampling, you're like, oh man, barrel 300 in the middle of the stack tastes really great. Let's get that out as a single cask. You need to deconstruct half.
No, just call whoever's the Jenga master in the group.
Yep. And then you redo it like this, and then it's much easier to get access to your whiskey.
But they still have to unload half of it, depending on who's doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and also, you guys were someone was asking about dunnage. So this is what the dunnage style is versus palletized. And then also, so what this means is when they are unloading it, they have a mattress, like this really gross looking mattress that they put on the end, that they roll the casks off when they have to deconstruct it to pull stuff for battings. So it's really interesting that when Shane, our master blender, sends along a list of like, I want these casks pulled, it might be that bottom corner. You got to take it all apart, but we have a great team, so it's worth it.
Yeah. And they're all they're 500 pounds once they're full.
Yeah.
So
You guys have that policy, if you can carry it out, you can have it.
Good luck to you.
we would have the strongest workforce.
Good
To be
luck to
honest,
you.
I was late because I did a,
If you can lift it, you can take it.
Yeah.
I have never been able to lift it yet, and this is a good incentive to go to the gym.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, everybody voted. All right. Oh, I like the answer on that one. Ha ha ha. All
to
right.
be honest, I was at a Garrison tasting before this.
Hmm.
More pretty barley just because.
Oh, just because.
Hmm.
I mean, just so everybody knows too, that these, some of these colored varietals that we have distilled, it'll still be how many years until they're ready?
4 at least.
Yeah, so stay tuned, but we're working on it.
Yeah.
So since these the single casks are fresh in our mind, Tyler, what do you think? What do you think? Which cask was the favorite for the group?
Oh, I'm thinking the PX 7525 took the
And I
crowd.
did a guess.
I'm gonna say port.
All right, and the answer is you're both wrong. But you're both
Oh,
Port and Madeira tied for first place. So
yeah, nice.
go. I could have told you Madeira was the best.
But that's a pretty even split.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, for those of at home who are watching this recording, it's 35, 35, 30. It's 7-7-6. So it's pretty much tied all around.
Yeah.
Really, what we're saying is we have something for everyone.
What you're saying is you don't make bad casks. All right, let's check out results number 2. What do you think was the favorite in the special edition lineup?
You mean our outpost range?
Yeah.
Um,
I'm gonna.
I think Solum, but Colere is going to be no, Garryana's my second pick on that, but
Yeah.
Did you just name all 3?
So one of those.
Solum, Colere, or Garryana?
Solum on the Colere.
I'm gonna say Solum.
Solum. Final answer.
This makes me feel a little better. You're both wrong.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, man.
Knew it was Garryana. All right.
I suppose it really depends. If you're not a peat lover, then that's not gonna be.
I think Solum doesn't taste like peat. I really enjoyed it.
Nah,
I thought Garryana was the funkiest one, and it was my least favorite of the bunch.
So for context, the Dean doesn't like peaty whiskey.
Good to know.
So for me, I would have, if I got to vote, which I never do, I would have rated them Colere, Solum, Garryana.
Oh, interesting. So, because I feel like Garryana is such a flavor bomb always, like in the best way possible. So I thought the red wine would do it for you. But interesting.
It was the spiciness of it, and it was good. It felt a little sharp, a little medicinal because of the Garryana oak.
Yeah, that if you ever get the chance to try just Garryana on its own, holy crap, it's like intense.
Yeah.
And I've heard that about what is it, the Mizunara oak as well, that it's very intense.
Yeah.
All right, and then the favorite of the night, the top 7.
We've been wrong every time. So I don't know.
what? There's another one?
Garryana.
We voted 3 times. All right, the group's favorite of all 7.
Garryana.
Madeira.
Garryana.
What'd you say, Anna?
I said Madeira.
Madeira. All right.
Please say
And here's the kicker. Do you think anyone voted for the Flagship as their favorite?
Yes.
No.
Was it you, Tyler?
It wasn't me.
All right, here are the results. A 4-way tie.
Got one.
And it had to be either Ann or Tyler that voted. So who voted for Flagship? Raise your hand. Be honest. We have one vote.
Yeah.
You did. Wow. Good job.
Jim.
Oh, I love it.
Arguably the
All that
most
talk about the Madeira cask being so amazing, and you vote for Flagship, Dad?
arguably it's the most complex in the bunch. It's got so much of everything. He just has good taste.
Yes, I did vote for the Flagship, yes. But the Madeira of the other ones was my favorite after that.
Nice. So for those playing along at home, Colere, Garryana, Solum, and Madeira tied for first place with 4 votes each. Wow. And then everything else got a vote as well. Madeira got 2, PX got 1, and Flagship got 1. Wow. I don't think we've ever seen that. It was a first.
That's great.
So Tyler, I missed the very beginning of this. So what side are you on, like the Tacoma side of Seattle?
We're down in the Soto neighborhood, so near the stadiums, just south of the downtown core.
Okay, my wife would probably know that better. My wife grew up in Federal Way, so.
Okay. Yeah, we're north of there for sure. We're just like 2 minutes south of the downtown Seattle.
Okay.
So Tyler, my wife and I are coming up to see the Dodgers play. As you can see, I'm a Dodger fan, play Seattle.
Heck
And
yeah.
we're going to be there for the weekend. So maybe we'll find a way to slip by.
We're right in the neighborhood of the stadium. So yeah.
All right.
But you can't wear your LA Dodgers hat when you go to
I
the
guarantee
distillery.
you I'll be wearing my LA Dodgers hat. I live in Oregon, but I'm still a Dodger fan.
Heck yeah. We'd love to have you in.
All right.
So Tyler, what's next? What's in the works? What are you most excited for coming up? Now that you finally got Solum out, which was the big project.
Yeah. I mean, so like the biggest, most philosophical topic I'm getting into is looking at developing barley crops that are non-homogeneous and basically have mixed genetics in there. Because when you're looking at a field like this one, it's all the same variety, it's all grown to the same height. And basically, if there was a single disease or a pest or a weather event that came in, it could knock out that entire field all in one swoop. But if you had various genetics in populations within that field, you potentially could have a greater resistance to a single weather event or a single disease. You might only lose 20% of your crop versus the whole thing. So there's studies that show that mixed genetics, non-homogeneous crops and mixed populations can have benefits for yield for the farmers. And it's just a matter of figuring out how to make the processing side for our maltsters and us as whiskey makers. How do we basically redefine what malt grade barley is to accept something that would be wildly different off the field? And so this is a big topic that will take kind of years to implement, but is very much what I hope to be kind of the future of whiskey production to some degree. So yeah, it'd basically be a field that it would have red, blue barley, pale barley. It would be all sorts of heights. It would look so ugly and weird, but hopefully it'll make a really compelling whiskey.
Awesome. And then I don't think Colere, I don't think these editions are here yet, right? I think Colere 3 is not here yet, and Garryana 7 is not here. I've seen 2 and 6 in some of the stores.
Should be.
3 is in California already.
Okay.
Yeah, and 3 should be soon if it isn't already. Might depend on the retailer.
How does 2 compare to the 3? And how does 6 compare to 7?
Yeah, so for Garryana, the 6 was Oloroso finished. So that'll have a different profile for sure. Can certainly send more tasting notes or whatever to you guys if you want any of that. And then Colere 2, I'll let you speak to the barley.
Yeah, well, so the Garryana 6 with the Oloroso profile, right? As you just tried in that Sherry cask. There's going to be a little bit more of a nutty flavor profile. There's no peat in the component last year's Garryana versus this year, so there's not the smoky element. It's much more highlighting that kind of the berry syrup element that's naturally in the Oregon oak. So yeah, look for a kind of not sweeter, a little bit sweeter profile in Garryana 6. Last year's Colere was Talisman. It's a winter 2-row variety, ex-bourbon casks. Very, very clean. It's biscuity flavors, yes, and it's grain, but like I'd say just more kind of grain, whole grain bread notes. It's not intensely nutty in some cases. It's very much more clean, and I think that's why I really liked this Colere 3 edition. Is just how grain forward it was, that it allowed us to play around with the cask finish on it. So yeah, it's I think obviously it's going to be a little bit less ester, less fruity. Last year's edition of Colere versus this year because of the sherry cask influence, but overall really delicious.
How long can one store the barley tea?
About 4 hours is what is recommended for basically the flavor to not change. Your next health hazard would be, I don't know, it could start fermenting if you leave that out long enough.
Some sort of
It'll
beer
start,
or something.
yeah, you'll make beer.
That sounds like don't threaten me with a good time kind of sketch.
Exactly.
That's not a hazard. That's an incentive to leave it out. Thanks.
I mean, what you want to do with that, good luck to you. Have fun.
I'll put this next to my sauerkraut and see what happens.
There you go.
That's one sort of fermentation you can do. Yeah. And I guess just for other upcoming things too, like you already mentioned, we have our Cask exchange that's coming out in August. Much later in the fall, we'll have Garryana 8 that will be coming out. That will be it tastes quite different than this one, which is exciting. I won't give you too many details on that, but stay tuned.
No, please give us details.
It's highlighting a different kind of sort of accompaniment to the Garryana than this one. With some lighter notes with it. And then after that, we will also have another cask exchange that will be coming out in December, which is another beer finish. It's going to be an imperial stout, which we're pretty excited by. It's a perfect winter release. And interspersed with that, we also have some single casks, like distillery exclusives that were coming out. The next one that's coming out in October, I'm super stoked about. So if anybody wants to come in October, that's a great time to come try out our hand fill station. That's going to be fantastic. The peated ex-bourbon. I cannot wait. It's going to be delicious. But yeah, always something new coming out.
Mm-hmm.
I know we asked about this last time. When you do these the what are they called again? The companion where you send the barrel back there and back.
Cask exchange.
Cask exchange. What are the chances of getting the beer to go along with the whiskey?
So those the releases kind of happen independently, just because of timing, right? Like we might be finishing for 6 to 9 months. And so you then collaborate with the brewer to sit on that release for that long. So sometimes specifically when it comes to like an imperial stout or something like that, they usually time those releases for the winter time. But if we release our whiskey then in July, I don't know if anybody really wants an imperial stout in July when it's 90 degrees out. So yeah, but that's something I've been kind of thinking about, is to try and figure out a way to maybe make a cask exchange festival or something like that. Would be pretty fun to get us all on the same page at the same time.
Yeah, I know you can find some of the older cask exchanges out and about. We just did some market visits this week, and I found one little shop in a tiny little town that had some Holy Mountain still in there in Duval.
Okay.
I know. I was like, ooh, I might go buy that myself because it was really good.
I googled the old tub thumper that you showed us a picture of, and for anyone who's interested, it's listed as a fancy beer at 11.9% ABV. And it's quite an interesting beer. I don't even know what I think.
think it's a barley wine.
Barrel aged blended barley wine.
Yeah.
What is a fancy beer? What is a fancy beer? I don't know what that
The
means.
barley wine is what it's listed as.
Yeah.
Keep your pinky up.
Yeah, there's a whole shtick to it, but yeah, I remember we talked about your sour, the beer, the sour, the cherry sour, and I
Yeah.
still can't even find the bottle.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, it's really exciting to see what kind of flavors we can come up with and what brewers can come up with when we're not, trying to get in each other's way and dictate, creativity in other directions. So yeah, we got some cool stuff coming out of this program.
Does anyone have any other nerdy production questions or Westland questions you guys have been dying to ask? Did I miss anything in the chat? I don't think so.
It's a silly question. The Garryana trees, and I'm probably saying that wrong. Can they grow anywhere else in Washington area?
Probably, but I think it's largely when you pull up a Washington state map so we can all be on the same page.
And the reason I'm asking is, like, whenever I drove years ago up through central Washington, where they're growing all the hops for the beer, they have no windbreaks. So I'm thinking this would be a perfect spot for those trees because there's no shade. The hops growers can use the trees as windbreaks, so it would benefit both.
Yeah. It would have to be certainly a long-term investment because of how slow growing these trees are. Like, they wouldn't see the shade for their kids might hopefully see the shade. So there's that element, but I think you're not seeing the natural habitat in those hotter, drier areas. Like, you're getting a little bit of hop growing here down in that south central part of Washington. So that may be possible, but I think while they're still drought tolerant, it's just too hot for too long on the east side of the Cascades, is my guess.
We do have one more question. Yes, go ahead.
So I remember back in the day that the idea when the first notion of this outpost range was coming out was to try and get through the first one of each one of them. And now with Solum, you finally hit one of each one of them. And it was a big idea around experimentation and trying to break the traditional commodity marketplace and all the stuff that Tyler talked about earlier. So I'm interested, now that you've got one of each of these out here, Tyler, like, where is your mind going with respect to experimentation, right? Like, we've seen all the casks you've done, your 7-8 releases into Garryana, you've finally got the peach, you've got so many experiments going on with grain. Where does your mind go to with respect to the outpost range, and where are you trying to explore, and what is out there with respect to, like, I don't know the answer to this and it's the priority for me to figure it out through this range?
Yeah, a couple elements that we're going to be able to weave together in the future for the outpost range that I'm excited about, right? And like the core theme of barley and malted barley is and can make a surprise visit in any of those 3 ranges, right? If we're working on some wacky purple variety, it can make its way as a pale variety into Colere, or we can throw some smoke on it and have a Solum release. Or, that same batch could have a cask peeled off and thrown into Garryana. So there's a lot of variety and options that we've got with what we've already produced. And so that's what I'm really trying to be mindful of, is to not continue exploration with the same rapid pace. It's now to start looking at the lessons that we've learned and start cherry picking winners for the future that will make sense, because the 30 varieties of barley that we've distilled, most of them, quite honestly, are so similar in flavor and genetics that the farmers aren't seeing a dramatic difference when they grow them. We're seeing nuanced differences in flavor. So how are we going to communicate nuanced changes to consumers, you know, when consumers are oftentimes steps removed from our lips. So I'm more interested in going in and reevaluating the data and saying, okay, what was really impactful, and how can we continue to pull those big levers to make big impacts, but and do it in a way that's thoughtful for our suppliers. So like we found some really flavorful purple varieties of barley, but they didn't grow well for our farmers. So not going to do it again. There's fortunately other varieties that are very similar in, you know, color that we'll explore. But yeah, Colere is gonna not Colere, but the Outpost range is going to be focused, but while still having, gosh, so much room for options and creativity. It's exciting, even though it does seem kind of daunting to say like, oh, I'm gonna collapse things down a little bit. But no, it's pretty exciting, to be honest.
When you think about that range, and you think about the number of variables coming into it, one of the things that you seem to have fixed upon is your production process. So have you experimented by adjusting your production process to try and pull out some of the nuances and varieties from these different grains? Like I feel like you're one of this group here where this is a nerdy session here. So it's like, yes, you've probably tried it, but I'd love to hear, what are the things that you've tried that you were hoping that would pull out some nuance in either the grain or the fermentation mechanism, and maybe it didn't pull out the nuance that you were hoping for?
Yeah, great question. So I guess the context behind that question is our batch size. We produce something for a full week, and we make, you know, roughly 5 barrels a day. So at the end of that week, we've got enough whiskey in the rack house that we can kind of do this mainline Colere project, but also look at it in different iterations in the future, should we want to, you know, finish that cask in a different way. So we've got a lot of flexibility built in, and you know, actually, I just lost my train of thought. I pulled out and I lost your question.
No, it's all good. It was like, what are some of the production things? Like, have you adjusted production cut points, fermentation, the way you mash? I mean, so many variables here. Too many. So what have you tried? I'm interested in what you've tried. And I'm also interested in, like, what have you tried that you were hoping that would really work and was just an abject failure? Like, we learn so much from things that we hope go right and just don't go. So just kind of production side.
Yep. I'm back with you now.
Yeah.
So for that
Welcome back.
We're going to do everything kind of the exact same standardized process that we do everything for.
Right.
And usually we don't repeat varieties because we've got enough of a production underway where there's, you know, 35 barrels in the rack house. And so I don't often revisit varieties because I've got enough of a glance that one single shot is going to give me enough of an opportunity. But there are times when I can't continually ask farmers to plant something new. And so I have to go with what they've been growing, what's been growing well for them. So that's when we look at revisiting that variety and look at the numbers and see what can be optimized, or see if anything should be optimized. And that's where we start to think about the heavy mash technique and augmenting the temperature of water in the mash tun to see if there's different levels of lipids and oils that we can extract from that same grain. But then again, like, and I say this because we're also not a research facility, but I also don't want to say, oh, well, I've already tried that grain last year, let's do something new, because there also could be a vintage effect to what happened in that field that year. So we're not quick to try and optimize and to try and fine tune things before the whiskey's even gotten out of the cask. So the heavy mash technique is one area.
Sorry, what is the heavy mash technique?
So heavy mash technique is when we add hotter water during the mashing procedure to extract more lipids from the barley itself.
So
in the second and third sparges, I know you know about this. So yeah, the second and third sparges have hotter temperatures and the distillation piece as well.
Yeah. So then there's a distillation factor where normally in our wash runs, we operate a double distillation, just like you'd see in Scotland. But for us, we make a cut in our wash still. So the still starts running at 120 proof. Normally you'd collect all the way down to 2% ABV, and that's your low wines for your next distillation. For us, we collect from 120 proof down to 30 proof. Everything below 30 proof gets saved as tails. That means our low wines carried over for spirit runs are a little bit lighter. They also don't have this fraction of long chain fatty acids in their esters that would create a heavier, oilier spirit. For our heavy mash technique, we don't make that cut. So everything is captured in our wash runs and carried over, so that ultimately what carries through to our distillate is going to have a profile of a bigger, weightier, heavier, oilier spirit for long-term maturation. So modulating mashing temperatures is the primary way that we would kind of look to change the flavor profile. And then the other is similar, but also kind of just nuanced, and that's targeting a finer grind profile and being probably a little bit more aggressive either with our agitation during mashing or being a little bit more loosey-goosey with the lautering and extracting a more turbid wort that has, again, more of those, the oily, the barley compounds to give us a bigger profile.
Have you experimented at all with, is it a mash filter, where I think there's just a couple of them in Scotland, right? Where you can pass it through a membrane that allows you to grind and get that grist ratio completely different.
Yeah.
I see you smiling. So either you want it and you want someone to fund it, or or you've tried it. So
in my dreams, we would have a mash filter press because what you can do is then you can grind your barley into a fine powder, to a fine flour, and then pass it through this, and you just squeeze every bit of extract that you want out there. You got to modulate some of your mashing procedures, so you get a higher yield, which is good, right? That's desirable. But
no one's sad about that, right?
For us, it's the ability to process weird grains that normally we would be challenged by. So some of the purple, black varieties of barley that we distill, they don't have a husk. So during the mashing and the lautering procedure, that husk acts as a filter that you then filter all of the grain through. Without that, it's difficult to process. So a mash filter press, you just grind everything into a flour, squeeze every bit of juice out of it, and you move on with your life. So it'd be really freaking cool.
I'm going to keep asking questions unless someone cuts me off here. Someone's got to stop.
No, please keep going. I love all of these. These are amazing. Please keep going.
Yeah. Tyler, can you talk a little bit about any other yeast experiments that you've done? So we had a group that got together, and most of us probably know that Four Roses just put out a almost like a yeast tasting set that isolated the 5 strains that they had across 2 different mash bills. And so the common refrain that we keep hearing is that, oh my gosh, yeast is completely underrated. Yet we get on every one of these and everyone is talking about how important yeast is. So I'm interested in, yes, you guys have pushed it with yeast and going into brewer's yeast and some of these other areas. What else have you tried? And what else do you kind of want to try in the space of yeast?
Yeah, largely that has been in the early days of the company's development. I think there were probably a dozen different yeast strains that were tried as they were putting together the mash bill and everything else that would eventually become who we are. So they tried, the standard M strain, the Chico ale yeast, which is the ale yeast that was developed by Sierra Nevada and is being used by a lot of craft brewers and craft distillers alike. We tried a number of them, and this is actually the second Belgian Saison brewer's yeast that we landed on. But for the large part, there's not been any experimentation with the fermentation process in the past 10 plus years. And that's just, again, to provide, an element of consistency and a singular lens to focus all of these various experimentations through. I love yeast. Other than barley, yeast is vastly becoming one of the most interesting parts of this business for me. And I'm a Harriet Watt student right now, finishing up my master's thesis, and yeast and fermentation is kind of where I'm focusing my research. I hope to find a way to. Oh God. Okay. So
You have no idea what you just asked about. I just want to be clear about that.
It warms all of our nerdy cold hearts. So by all means, keep
We
going.
love a rabbit hole.
yeah.
And get your trowels ready.
So-
I mean, and then we're going to ask you about the types of fermentation vats you have and what you think about lactobacillus and long time fermentation and what that does to your core spirit. Because when you taste, so I've got Colere 1 here and I've got 3, and in 1 I can taste the flagship core distillate pulling through. In 3, I don't. I see a totally different expression of what that almost that new make core distillate is. So I'm interested. I mean, it seems like someone very intentionally was like, I want to try something a little bit different. So my sense is that this happened earlier in the process as well too. So just go, talk to us.
Yeah. So Westland specifically, our fermentation profile has been the same now for years and years. We're operating on 96-hour total fermentation time. I mean, primary fermentation ends at right around after that second day. It's really after that you get lactobacillus development, and we love that and promote that. We don't sanitize pretty heavily here. We don't boil our wort. We're very clean. But by all means, there's an active biological activity floating around in the air. And certainly it comes in on the grain itself, not being sterile. So lactobacillus comes in from the barley. We don't boil our wort, so that's carrying through to fermentation. And yeah, after primary fermentation is done, we'll get a little bit of development of lacto. And it's important for our flavor profile. I couldn't say, what it's really like when we haven't had that influence, because we've been fairly consistent since day one. But to dive down the rabbit hole of yeast, and so in Norway has been brewing in small farmhouse communities for hundreds and hundreds of years outside of the larger commercial brewing structure. So basically within these small farmhouse villages, farmers would harvest their annual barley crop and they would make a beer from it. And what became really interesting is that they would save the yeast from their brewing process. And they would do that by making a little wooden ring, dipping it in the yeast slurry after fermentation was done. They would hang it in the rafters and then they would leave it. And then next year they would brew their one batch of beer again. They would take that ring down from the rafters. It would be covered in dried yeast, and they would make their wort. Sometimes it was a boiled wort. Other brewing communities made it a raw ale where they used unboiled wort. And then they would take that ring and they would mix it around in the wort. And within a matter of like 10 to 15 minutes, poof, active fermentation would be bubbling away. And so these strains of yeast, cultures of yeast really are called kvike. And they have been used specifically within these small brewing communities in such a way that no outside yeast has really gotten their genetics in. And so they've developed some really unique characteristics. They ferment really quickly, like within 48 hours, they fully ferment beer. They ferment with complete disregard for temperature, which is fucking bizarre. Sorry for the language, but yeast is really specific in its temperature profiles that it likes. And typically in higher temperature situations, it stresses out the yeast and it produces a lot of esters and higher alcohols. Like Westland, we cap our fermentation for the Saison yeast at 26 degrees Celsius. Any higher than that, we get way too many esters, way too many higher alcohols, and it's just starts to get a little hairspray-y kind of. It's no good. These yeast strains can ferment 38 degrees Celsius and still be doubling their cell count. they can ferment up to 42 degrees Celsius and still be swimming along super duper happy. Some of the yeast strains were developed for really strong ales, where they would boil the wort for 3 hours prior to pitching their yeast. So the gravity was like super high, gravity meaning the amount of sugars in that liquid substrate. So high gravity yeasts are somewhat rare because the high gravity substrate stresses out yeast and it creates a lot of off flavors. And so in the world of brewing and distilling, finding a yeast strain that is active and does well and doesn't produce off flavors in a high gravity environment is like one of the holy grails of sustainability. So these yeast strains, they also don't produce any diacetyl, which is the off flavor specifically that affects brewers really, and it tastes and smells like buttered popcorn. And you know, in brewing, you need some brewers, breweries have like members on staff that they refer to them as the diacetyl hounds, because they just have a really great sense for diacetyl. And they'll go over to that finishing tank. Okay, no, we didn't do it the other day. There's still some diacetyl. We need to clean it up. So you leave it in the fermentation tank longer and longer. Well, if you're not creating any diacetyl, your throughput on your production is just massively increased. If you don't need to modulate your temperature, well, your demand for energy and glycol is massively decreased. So I am hoping that there's a way to investigate these yeast strains in the context of sustainable whiskey production, because they also have like really bizarre range of flavor profiles that they can make. They're really like ester driven. Some of them are super tropical and mango and papaya. Others are funky and mushroomy and umami. And most of these strains, you underpitch them, meaning if you add just a little bit of yeast, the desire to grow and replicate its cells increases the amount of ester production as the fermentation scales and develops. If you overpitch, you get less ester production. And so by modulating things like temperature and the amount of yeast you add to your initial fermentation, you can create anything from an IPA to a clean Pilsner style beer with the same yeast strain. Fucking Kveik yeast is wild.
Let me tell you, when the cursing starts is when the conversation actually begins. So we're 2.5 hours into it, and we're just now getting started. So I'm also interested in no, absolutely not. This is wonderful. So Tyler, can you talk a little bit about what you've thought and what you've done earlier in the mashing process with respect to the filtering and the filtering options you have, as a means of kind of continuating that process into fermentation, right? So depending on how clear it is and how much you allow to go through and how quickly it is, you're not going to have everything converted before you get into the fermentation vessel. So we know that there's Scotch distilleries out there that ferment for incredibly long periods of time, knowing that the conversion is going on while they're in the washback. So I'm interested in you mentioned, I think earlier, that you're trying to go for a particularly clear type of wort. What has happened when you've tried, or have you tried some of these other styles of cloudy wort, as it pertains to the way you're thinking about fermentation? Like we tend to think of this stuff as very discrete steps in production, whereas the reality is they're very much connected and overlap. So I'd love your perspective on, what have you noticed with respect to, as you go down this fermentation experimentation, what's happening one step previously with respect to your mashing?
So gosh, it's deep. Well, when you modulate your turbidity of your wort, right, and you're gonna get and you're targeting a more cloudy wort, one of the things you're probably going to also see is a greater load of free amino nitrogen, or FAN as we call it. And the FAN, or free amino nitrogen, is basically makes up the nutrient substrate for yeast as they grow. Yeast consumes sugar as its primary food source, but if it doesn't have free amino nitrogen and these kind of micronutrients within the substrate, you're not going to get a healthy fermentation. The flavor profile is probably going to be skewed often in a direction that you're not expecting. So the core substrate of what you've got there is really important. And if you're going to target a cloudy wort, you're probably going to have a greater degree of these free amino nitrogen compounds. And they're nitrogen, they're protein based. One of the compounds that I've been looking at, and I guess not just this, but trying to identify what the contributions of barley as a whole and its unique variety, and how we can track the variety characteristics to overall flavor production, and these fan compounds are one of them. And so if you basically look at them as the building blocks for yeast and the kind of biosynthesis, they're going to convert these things into other categories of flavor profiles. Well, let's try to dive into that. So like isoleucine is very present in high protein varieties of barley. So I imagine if you're going to target a mashing procedure that also extracts higher protein content, you're going to get more isoleucine, which catabolizes during fermentation to create more 3-isomethylbutanol, which smells and tastes malty. So specifically, like the question that you're asking is honestly research that we haven't done to that depth, unfortunately. But it's not because we're not mindful of it. It's just we just don't have the time and the resources to stop it and investigate that specific situation. And also, like while we will modulate, actually, I'll say this, is that it's something that fortunately I'm really happy to have a great staff. And we've hired on a couple of new guys from the outside. Our mashman came to us from Woodinville Whiskey, but was previously at Lagunitas, Urban Family Brewery, and a bunch of others. And so the other day, he kind of made a comment about like, oh yeah, we always try to target entering into the fermentation tank at this specific temperature, but sometimes it's summer and we can't get our cooling water to the right temp. So we don't really track what happens when it's off by a couple of degrees. And he's absolutely right. And so this is the kind of thing that, like, to your point, we haven't always been as mindful of tracking something like that. Like, okay, what are the exact changes in fermentation after this change to the turbidity of our wort? But we've got the team in place that I'm really excited about, that we're starting to have more time and manpower to ask those questions. So
someone else has to step in. Come on, folks. I'm gonna ask about barrel proofing, and I can just keep going. Someone else. Thank you.
A little bit here. I'm not actually going to take over from you because you're doing a great job. I just want to say that I'm not a beer drinker, but I have to say the Lagunitas is it their IPA with that, I don't know, it's a wonderful citrusy flavor, but hoppy as well. And it's a really great little beer. I don't know if he brings any of that with him to you, because I can actually taste some of that here in your whiskeys, and I don't know if it's just in my head or what, but that's all.
Yeah, Will's been with us for about a year, so his work hasn't made it into the glass yet. But it's certainly made it into the barrel, and he's certainly had a dramatic impact on the team in a short amount of time. So
well, it's complementary, at least, to what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, great. That's good to hear.
Okay, it's all you again.
So with the peated malt, right, your peated distillate, I assume that now that the peated expression is discontinued, you're no longer distilling Scottish peated malt. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So how long is the Flagship going to be the Flagship if there's the peated malt is changing, aging out, no longer being this, like, right? It's eventually going to run out.
Yeah, great question. We have a lot of peated whiskey. We
Is there
were
a point where you like move it to an inactive cask so it stops getting wood on it?
Yeah, probably. I would certainly see that as being a possibility. We made we would on average make peated whiskey for I think 6 to 9 weeks out of the year, which was a fair amount of whiskey, and it would go into a combination of ex-bourbon and new oak. So that new oak certainly is going to have a longer runway. When you think about just, let it be and kind of know where the predicted maturation profile is going to be before you have to make any moves. The new American oak stuff, yeah, you have to be more delicate, more mindful, and more active about its maturation program. I really love, just an anecdote, I love the peated whiskey in new American oak. To me, it's got this like crunchy peanut butter element that I really, really love. But yeah, we've got a lot of peated whiskey, and we're gonna have that enough whiskey for that flagship release for like until at least 2030, if not beyond. So
What's gonna run out first? I would assume the American oak's gonna run out first.
The American Pete?
No, out of your already laid down from your original 3, you had the sherry cask, the peated, and the American, right? Obviously, you had so much sherry that it ended up in a bunch of Eureka boxes. So, do you have the least amount of American? What's the least amount of backstop?
Well, I guess you're asking about like the finished product, and that's not really how the whiskey is constructed.
Oh,
right. Like we'll make a 5 malt grain bill and we'll fill it into a number of casks, like new American oak and ex-bourbon, and that makes up 60% of our production. Pale malt makes up 20% of our production, and then peated makes up like the rest of it. And we can blend to spec that final whiskey, and so it's not like living in our rack houses in that same ratio, so to speak. So because the 5 malt in new American oak makes up the majority of what our release is, that's the majority of what we've got in the rack houses, and then we blend to meet the specifications for each release. So yeah, the sherry casks, they exist with a number of spirit types in them, both our 5 malt, our peated, our pale malt, our boutique specialty varieties are going into there. But it's very, very dynamic lot of whiskey that we can pull from and construct. So we're not locked into anything like that. It's not like in cask in that specific recipe.
Okay. Back to you, Sid.
Someone else, come on. I'm waiting for someone else to come off mute. Otherwise, I'm going to ask Tyler about barrel entry proof. And what are your thoughts? What is kind of your philosophy around, what does barrel entry proof give you with respect to your dunnage warehouses and your maturation philosophy? And we know that Maker's Mark just came out with their BEP, barrel entry proof kind of experiment. So and that's also aligned to another question around, have you taken Westland and maybe kind of put it into a knackered cask a la Glenfarclas and just let it age for 10, 12? I'm interested what happens over time with a little less cask influence. So barrel entry proof and longer term non-active maturation.
Yeah, so very important, right? Your entry proof and your cask size are going to have big determinations on the direction of the flavor profile. So all of our new American oak, we target at 110 proof, and that is a lower proof than our ex-bourbon, ex-Westland, ex-sherry casks at 125 proof, which we're probably going to extract a bit of a greater tannin structure with a lower proof, but also we really love the kind of like softer wood sugar notes that we get. And with the used cooperage, like the higher proof really does help with extract, especially getting beyond that on the other side of that char layer that's been developed. So One thing I want to say about the size of the casks is it's an interesting concept, right? Is how much oak influence, but also how much oxidation you're getting plays into a role, because we're finding that, yeah, the oxidation isn't coming through from the oak itself, but in between the staves. And so there's a lot of interesting experiments going on to identify what are the key factors in driving the maturation flavors. So we had Seguin Moreau build us a bunch of 500-gallon or 500-liter butts, new oak butts. So we've got new American oak and new French oak 500-liter butts. So normally a 500-liter butt would be filled with sherry, but this is a brand new cask. So we're going to get our a better insight to what our spirit type looks like with kind of longer maturation in these, with what I would expect would be more oxidation, but less of that cask influence. I'm not really sure, where that flavor profile is going to be headed. If I'm going to be completely honest, it's going to be softer. I'm guessing more of a beechwood, like soft kilned lumber kind of influence on it, rather than the caramelized wood sugar element. And because the esters are going to be kind of driven faster by a greater degree of oxidation. I just don't know. And there's a lot going on there.
So kind of in that same realm of oxidation and kind of experimenting with that, have you experimented, or what are your thoughts around not filling the cask all the way and allowing for that headroom to kind of start off earlier on in the process, as opposed to taking the in and out pressure over time? Because we know it's different. It's O2 and O are different, right, with respect to the oxidation process. Have you guys played with increasing the headroom right off the offset at all? And if you haven't, it sounds like, I think you just shook your head. What is your understanding of that process with respect to headroom and kind of the O transfer between in and out of the cask for maturation?
So that's not something that we've played around with. I would like to say we'll get there and find the time to do it. We're not gonna be, this might fall under that heading of like, we're not the research facility distillery that I want us to be, right? Because it's always going to be more financially prudent to fill that barrel all the way up. So yeah, I'm gonna have to sit on the sidelines probably to wait and see what others are saying.
Like, please, somebody else ask for this.
Yeah. I wish I could comment with a greater point of authority, but I'm not going to be the guy on this one.
I'm going to ask my last question, and then please, someone in the name of all that is good, take over here. So what is, of all the nonsense ideas that you have out there that are totally impractical, what is the one experiment you want to do that is just not financially feasible, but in your mind is like, this will produce something that is freaking tasty?
Are you laughing because you know something?
No, I'm laughing because I am so delighted and I cannot wait to hear your answer. We're gonna pitch this in next budget session. It'll be great.
So for some context, I asked Marianne Eves the same exact question, and she had done I guess distilled chestnuts as an experiment at Old Forester, like it at micro still, like they just got it. They found someone that would help them do it. And it was just a crazy experiment. And she had left Old Forester by the time it actually got into barrel, and she didn't get to taste it. And so that was the thing that she's like, I wish I could go back and taste that. So yeah, I'm interested in the wacky, like there's something out there that we haven't tried or tasted or thought of, because it's just not the norm, or it's not feasible. And if there's anything that you guys don't care about, it's the norm and the feasible. So I'm interested in kind of, yeah.
Well, I mean, one thing I'm curious about is, and I don't know if it'll be our norm or feasible, but looking at something like this.
Oh, it's not sharing.
So looking at those colored varieties of barley, but in the context of our 5 malt grain bill, where they're then roasted and kilned to varying degrees, to create and really dive into the, the nuanced flavors of what happens under the, Maillard reactions of those individual varieties. It's always going to be more efficient, right, to take a similar pale variety that's commodity and work its flavor close enough and do some blending. These varieties probably will never lauder or have as great brewing efficiency as the varieties that we currently work with. So for me to develop and build like an elite mash bill, like 5 malt mash bill out of this stuff would be so cool, but not
It would be so expensive.
efficient for a business to run. Yeah.
And actually, I don't think you talked about the hulless varieties and what that's like to mash.
I didn't really talk about it, but it's
fun.
It's not easy. It's fun, but not easy. Because that husk provides a filtration element that's crucial in the brewing process, and without it, you get what's called a stuck mash, where all of these grains that you just ground up into a fine flour settle at the bottom of your false bottom tank, and they don't filter. So you need to add rice hulls to the tank in order to aid processing and filtration.
Which they have to bring up in a bag using a baseball bat. I feel
Or
like
you need Anna to fund your mash filter, and then you can grind finder, and then you don't have to worry about it, right?
Exactly. It's that mash filter. Then I can do all sorts of wild things. Without the mash filter press, we're limited to some old school brewing techniques that is fun, I think. But yeah, it's challenging.
also, I mean, the other challenge with some of these really cool barleys and everything, we can get folks to malt them and everything, but with what he was just talking about of kilning and everything and that different, more intense roasting, not everybody does that. Only a few people do that, and it's
No,
usually,
no one does it.
yeah, I mean, it's like
Okay.
larger malt houses, right? So it's,
Yeah.
we can't get those custom things, and like we can't do that. So that's sort of an interesting challenge as well. It was just like someday maybe you do some custom fun stuff like that.
I mean, I'm breaking my last. Oh, Kate, do you want to ask something, please? I was going to ask about Waterford and malting and crisp, and yeah, go, please.
No, go. I was gonna make a comment about all this, like trying to get people to put money into the pot to come up with something amazing, but totally you can't, there's no commitment, right? Just like, I'm going to give you $200 and you're going to collect $200 from a group of people, and you're going to have a pot of money, and you're going to do something amazing, or maybe not amazing. And everybody's going to get like, 300 milliliters of whatever the product is, and it could be gross. But we all take that chance, and we all agree that our $200 is going to go towards your experiment. I can't believe you couldn't do something like that. So that's all I was going to say, Sid.
Yeah. And I think Tony was going exactly where I was going. So the other distillery that seems to care about this after the fact, maybe from you guys, is Waterford in Ireland. And so I'm interested, Tyler, I'm sure you've watched what they're doing and the research that they've put out. What is it that you think that they're doing that's interesting? Because hopefully they're covering different ground than what you're doing with respect to grain and barley research and the Washington Bread Lab. So what is it that you're trying to pull from them? What is it that you're trying to contribute? And I'm interested more in kind of this grain thought as to, no one thought this was cool just even a few years ago, not dissimilar than yeast, but here we are. All of a sudden, the global grand folks are realizing that this is the place of differentiation, right? Like everyone's doing ex-bourbon. You're not going to find differentiation that using the commodity system, but you can pull something through interesting if you're cognizant of it from the beginning all the way through. So, would love to understand your perspective on what maybe Waterford is doing and what other folks are doing out there as it pertains to your thoughts in grain and barley.
Yeah, my hat goes off to them. They're doing good work, and I certainly appreciate it. It's what Waterford is doing in particular is highlighting and investigating the concept of terroir in whiskey making, and they're going to do it in their own way, which I really appreciate. So they brought in Dr. Dustin Herb, who came out of the OSU barley breeding program. He got his PhD there after publishing a paper that kind of helped lay the groundwork for a lot of what of us are doing recently in terms of helping to identify the direct link between terroir, concepts like terroir, malt modification, and the end all flavor of barley and ultimately beer. So they hired Dustin Herb to kind of be their in-house researcher and develop their program so that it was set up very much to kind of answer the question of whether or not terroir does affect barley. So they're sourcing from a really it's an incredible number of farms and farmers, but they're doing it in a way where they're really got great identity and great control over the destination of all those barley kernels. So their malt cathedral, as they call it, has separation bins for each farm and each variety, and keeping them all separate, which is a huge, complete challenge. And it's one of the issues with why it's hard to study that in the first place is like barley. It's just this little piece of grain, and it doesn't have a tag, it doesn't have a name, there's no code attached to it, there's no NFT that you can easily assign it, right? And so how do you know what it is and where it goes? You have to physically keep track of it. And large malt houses don't have that infrastructure. They batch everything up. I'm going to steal this from Devin. But you guys are all familiar, right, with the Portlandia show and the skit where Fred Armisen is like, "Oh, do you know the name of the chicken?"
Yes, epic, classic Portlandia.
Okay, what was her name? What was the diet that she fed? You know, did she grow up on the south side of the farm? Oh, okay, cool. That conversation cannot happen about bread in the United States. There's no possible way for you to talk to any baker in the United States and ask them who the farmer was that got them that grain. The links in the chain are just broken, and in some cases they are contractually bound to not tell you who the farmer is. A farmer will harvest their grain, they will ship it off to a grain elevator, which is just a giant silo. It gets batched up, mixed off, blended to spec, and sold to the lowest or the highest bidder. That's the commodity system. They don't care who you are, they don't care your story, and you don't know where it's going. And that's how farmers have been farming for decades and decades and decades in this country. So what we're doing, what Waterford is doing, is trying to pull ourselves out of this commodity system that erases every shred of humanity, that erases every bit of connection that we have to the sustenance that we fucking need, and try to put a face to a name and try to internalize again some of the risks that have just been pushed off on these farmers. So yeah, keeping grain separate is just a challenge. So what the folks at Waterford are doing is just an incredible task of working with a lot of different farmers and trying to evaluate and make compelling whiskeys. And that's the compelling whiskey, and the interesting part is where I think they deviate from their projected goal of investigating terroir, because a lot of what they do is finish in a cuvee style cask, so red wine finishes and all of that, and none of it is consistent release to release. So from my perspective, I love what they're doing. I love the terroir investigation. I love the connection to the farmers. But for them to tell me that terroir exists or matters based off of their whiskey releases, there's no one-to-one connection that I can ever draw, because there's no same cask type from release to release. But that's not necessarily the point that they're trying to tell. So I respect that.
When you say there's not the same cask type, I thought they were doing like 30% in X bourbon, 30% in X wine, and then 15 or 20% in something else. But I mean, ultimately, right, it's casks are going to be different, right?
Yeah.
I thought it was, but okay.
We had, so
Yeah.
for Virtual Tasting Society, Mark Renier came on and went on at length about everybody who's heard him speak knows.
It's never not at length, so yeah.
about just like using casks that he's like, we spend a lot of money on casks that they don't have flavor, but of course there's still going to be variation with that. And ultimately they still need to make a tasty whiskey like everybody, right? Like it's not as Tyler was saying, no one is a pure research facility, unfortunately. But you can still kind of glean insights from that.
Yeah.
It's just like looking at it through slightly different lenses, I feel like.
Yes.
It's not barley, but I did a tasting with High Wire out of South Carolina,
Yeah.
and they were doing single farm bourbon releases where they grew the corn, exact same corn varietal, different farms, and it was amazing how different they tasted. And I agree with you that Waterford, it just gets muted out because you can't tell what the difference is from the farm versus the cask, because the casks were all different. They were good, they were interesting, but you know, you want to taste something where you're using a scientific, you know, if they're going to sell it on that basis, then you want more of the scientific method where everything else is isolated. This is the difference. This is what you're tasting.
Yeah, but
the farm.
The problem is this is such a difficult experiment, you know, if you're trying to make it a scientific experiment to have, because, you know, cask to cask, the wood, right, could just impart such a different flavor.
If you're doing sherry casks or Madeira and
no,
all
right,
things
right, you got to get rid of all of that.
Is doing, you know,
right?
It's hard to detect what.
Right, you have to get rid of all of that, but the other thing is you have to get enough barrels so that you can, and then blend all the barrels together. So from the same farm.
If you're doing a single farm, but a blend, then you would think that the wood differences would, you know, even
exactly.
out.
That's my point exactly.
But if you're doing a single cask, then single casks, the wood can be a difference.
That's exactly my point. Yeah. I mean, I love that they're trying to do this, but I feel like, you know, it's a failed experiment in my mind. It's not a proper experiment.
It's a delicious experiment.
No, and that goes back to the thing that I asked earlier today was, you know, it's one thing to be scientific and nerdy and put out something for the science of it, and it's another that, hey, we're also a business and we need to put out whiskey that people want to drink, because an ex-bourbon single cask of this varietal from this farm may be interesting, but will people actually like it and buy it? Maybe not. So if we age that, you know, if we take that out of it and go a little broader, and we say, hey, it's that single varietal from that single farm, but we put it in a bunch of casks, so we're adding spices to our dish. It's still an omelet, but we're adding, you know, it's still the same chickens, it's still the same eggs, it's still an omelet, but we're adding salt, pepper, and whatever.
Yeah, I mean, like, to your point, like if I was to go and tell you, like, okay, this is the most cherished and most nuanced whiskey in the world, and then next year, like, this one's also really incredibly nuanced. Like, well, there's not much going on there, is what you're telling me. Like, the change in the degree of difference is this. So what you're offering me is something that's this interesting.
Yeah.
Like, let's find a way to make these you know, compelling and delicious. And so yeah, my hat's off to the guys at Waterford for taking an approach that's theirs, but also, you know, like, so much of the construction is doing it right. So the fact that I have, you know, personal differences with how I would finish the whiskey, whatever. They're doing a great job.
Okay.
But I
promise.
think,
Oh,
sorry, I was just going to say, ultimately, I think you are you're doing something interesting, but you're also making something marketable. And no offense to Waterford, I don't think they're being successful in that regard. But that's my opinion, right? So
We're still being recorded, so let's.
I know. I'm trying to be good. I'm trying to be good.
No, like it's an interesting experiment, and we'll see what they do in the future, right? They're young, they're fresh, they're starting out,
True.
and they're helping to support the local farmers, which is also important. So
Right. I am certainly going to follow them. I've tasted them at the beginning and a little bit later in the process, and I know a few years from now I'll taste them again and see if I feel differently.
that actually raises an interesting question. Tyler, you're well connected in the industry. What are some brands that you're following that you're excited about, that outside of obviously Westland, that you're keeping an eye on, that you think we should also be keeping an eye on? Whether that's American single malt or otherwise.
The most recent follow in my Instagram list is Root Shoot Malting out of Colorado. You should all follow them. They are an incredible malt house. So craft malt house. They have won the craft malt conference, their annual conference amongst the guild that they have, and they've taken top honors like 5 years in a row, and they keep winning award after award. They grow everything, so they're a state-run malt house. They grow all their own grain, they floor malt everything, and they're just releasing their first American single malt whiskey. I haven't tried it, I don't know anything about it, but I know enough about their quality of grain that has turned my head.
Followed.
Yeah.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's so many great whiskeys in America, so many single malts that I'm still discovering. That is a absolute pleasure. You mentioned McCarthy's earlier, and we're tasting McCarthy's at the end of September.
Oh, score.
Are we bringing Caitlin back? We're bringing Caitlin back.
Yes,
right?
we're bringing Caitlin back. Well, who else?
I know. I mean, it has to be Caitlin. We
Yeah.
had her the Clear Creek eau de vie.
So Caitlin's coming back, and she just sent me the lineup that we she told me there's only 3 McCarthy's, and I said, well, that's not acceptable. So she's throwing in a bourbon to get the corn people happy.
Oh, so it's a trail's end. All right, fine. Fair enough.
It's 3 and 3. It's 3 and 3, so it's not bad.
So
Don't tell me it's going to be September 28th, though.
Don't let anybody tell you differently. McCarthy's has been making single malt in this country longer than anybody. They've been using Garryana barrels longer than anybody. They're pioneers, hats off to them.
And to Kate's question, it's September 27th. I was smart enough not to double book that night.
Thank you.
There is an in-person event that night. So, any other questions?
Can I ask
Sid?
the last question? Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah,
so you've taken us on this
question.
incredible
You've been
journey.
Quiet all night.
I know. Someone mute this guy. So I feel like a big part of what Westland, one of the founding principles, I think, of Westland was around establishing this idea of American single malt. You guys have kind of done that. So kudos to you all. So I'm interested in kind of both a combination of where are you going to now, and then maybe a little bit of, after all that we've covered tonight, what do you want to leave us with as a last thought to kind of consider?
Yeah, so where now? I mean, we at the distillery feel like we're like just holding back this giant wave of American single malt whiskey as a category. We've been working for years now trying to build it, and we keep getting little whispers from the TTB that they will probably, possibly, maybe, hopefully give us ratification this fall. And so that's going to be really, really, really cool when they do. I mean, that'll be the first time since 1962 that a new designation of a spirit category has been made in the United States, and we're going to be a part of that, and it's going to turn heads, not just in the industry, but I think around the country to non-whiskey drinkers. A new thing like that is going to be talked about on a larger scale than what our industry magazines are able to get out there. So we're going to get a lot more people into the category. There's going to be a lot more talking about why there's not any corn in what we're doing. There's a lot of education coming our way, but I'm excited for that. And then, final question was about,
Who do you wanna leave them with?
what do I want to leave you with? Well, like, it's really, really hard to do when we're telling this message to anyone else, like in the bar, restaurant setting, but like, what we're trying to do is so connected and it places such great importance on the farmers that like I almost feel like I sound like a broken record or like this weird fake version of myself. Yeah, I'll be all about the farmers. But like if the farmer, like if I ask the farmer to plant organic barley, he's got to have a crop rotation designed to get the value out of the ground, not just for my barley crop, but for what follows. So if nobody is buying organic tulips, then he doesn't have a demand to keep his field organic certified. So I'm not going to get organic barley. So then you're not going to have organic whiskey. But more importantly, like we're not doing the right thing agriculturally and ecologically speaking by practicing farming practices that aren't optimized for soil health and integrity, right? So if we're not making decisions outside of our whiskey making decisions that also tie into agriculture and a better future, then nothing changes. And the whiskey stays expensive because there's no money being poured into, regenerative agriculture or sustainable produce or whatever. And so it always stays expensive and unobtainable. So, we can't always do it, but when you can, buy an organic potato. It'll help.
And apparently Washington is the biggest producer of potatoes in the US. What? I learned something today.
If nothing else.
Right? All that other whiskey stuff, yeah, whatever. I already texted all my friends in Idaho, so they're gonna come fighting.
Yeah.
That was amazing. I can't think of a better way to get us out tonight. We can hang out for another 2 hours. Next time, let's pick 6 more casks or 6 more expressions and touch base again next year. Do the newest releases of your what's the name of your range again?
Outpost range.
There you go, the Outpost range. So we'll do the newest releases of Outpost range. Do a couple more single casks or whatever the newest Tyler thought up experiment you got, and we'll touch base again next year if you're down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
totally.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for spending the evening with us, and thank you for setting this up. I know you're the spear that helped us keep going, so we appreciate you. Sid, thanks for coming in here hot. We got to have you on more often, man.
Great questions.
Everyone, thank you very much for being here, and we'll see you at the next one. We'll see you next week for some tequila.
Bye, guys.
Later. Bye, everyone.